We condemn the violence that took place here in the strongest possible terms. We grieve the loss of life in these hallowed halls, as well as the injuries suffered by those who defended our Capitol today. And we will always be grateful to the men and women who stayed at their posts to defend this historic place. To those who wreaked havoc in our Capitol today, you did not win. Violence never wins. Freedom wins. And this is still the people's house. And as we reconvene in this chamber, the world will again witness the resilience and strength of our democracy. For even in the wake of unprecedented violence and vandalism at this Capitol, the elected representatives of the people of the United States have assembled again on the very same day to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. So may God bless the lost, the injured, and the heroes forged on this day. May God bless all who serve here and those who protect this place. And may God bless the United States of America. Let's get back to work.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
I ask unanimous consent the Majority Leader and the Democratic Leader be allowed to speak, and that the time not count against 2 hours of debate in relation to the objection raised on the state of Arizona.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
On the state of the American people, the United States Senate will not be intimidated. We will not be kept out of this chamber by thugs, mobs, or threats. We will not bow to lawlessness or intimidation. We are back at our posts. We will discharge our duty under the Constitution and for our nation. And we're going to do it tonight. This afternoon, Congress began the process of honoring the will of the American people and counting the Electoral College votes. We've fulfilled this solemn duty every 4 years for more than 2 centuries. Whether our nation's been at war or at peace, under all manner of threats, even during an ongoing armed rebellion and the Civil War, the clockwork of our democracy has carried on. The United States and the United States Congress have faced down much greater threats than the unhinged crowd we saw today. We've never been deterred before and will be not deterred today. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed. They failed. They failed to attempt to obstruct the Congress. This failed insurrection only underscores how crucial the task before us is for our republic. Our nation was founded precisely so that the free choice of the American people is what shapes our self-government and determines the destiny of our nation. Not fear, not force, but the peaceful expression of the popular will. Now, we assembled this afternoon to count our citizens' votes and to formalize their choice of the next president. Now we're going to finish exactly what we started. We'll complete the process the right way, by the book. We'll follow our precedents, our laws, and our Constitution to the letter. And we will certify the winner of the 2020 presidential election. Criminal behavior will never dominate the United States Congress. This institution is resilient. Our democratic republic is strong. The American people deserve nothing less.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President. Mr. President, it is very, very difficult to put into words what has transpired today. I have never lived through or even imagined an experience like the one we have just witnessed in this Capitol. President Franklin Roosevelt set aside December 7th, 1941, as a day that will live in infamy. Unfortunately, we can now add January 6th, 2021, to that very short list of dates in American history that will live forever in infamy. This temple to democracy was desecrated, its windows smashed, our offices vandalized. The world saw Americans' elected officials hurriedly ushered out because they were in harm's way. The House and Senate floors were places of shelter until the evacuation was ordered, leaving rioters to stalk these hallowed halls. Lawmakers and our staffs, average citizens who love their country, serve it every day, feared for their lives. I understand that one woman was shot and tragically lost her life. We mourn her and feel for her friends and family. These images were projected to the world. Foreign embassies cabled home their home capitals to report the harrowing scenes at the very heart of our democracy. This will be a stain on our country, not so easily washed away. The final, terrible, indelible legacy of the 45th President of the United States, undoubtedly our worst. I want to be very clear. Those who perform these reprehensible acts cannot be called protesters. No, these were rioters and insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists. They do not represent America. They were a few thousand violent extremists who tried to take over the Capitol building and attack our democracy. They must and should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, hopefully by this administration, if not, certainly by the next. They should be provided no leniency. I want to thank the many of the Capitol Hill Police and Secret Service and local police who kept us safe today and worked to clear the Capitol and return it to its rightful owners and its rightful purpose. I want to thank the leaders, Democrat and Republican, House and Senate. It was Speaker Pelosi, Leader McConnell, Leader McCarthy, and myself who came together and decided that these thugs would not succeed, that we would finish the work of that our Constitution requires us to complete in the very legislative chambers of the House and Senate that were desecrated, but we know always belong to the people and do again tonight. But make no mistake, my friends, today's events did not happen spontaneously. The president who promoted conspiracy theories that motivated these thugs, the president who exhorted them to come to our nation's capital, egged them on. He hardly ever discourages violence and more often encourages it. This president bears a great deal of the blame. This mob was in good part President Trump's doing, incited by his words, his lies. This violence, in good part, his responsibility, his everlasting shame. Today's events certainly would not have happened without him. Now, January 6th will go down as one of the darkest days in recent American history. A final warning to our nation about the consequences of a demagogic president, the people who enable him, the captive media that parrots his lies, and the people who follow him as he attempts to push America to the brink of ruin. As we reconvene tonight, let us remember, in the end, all this mob has really accomplished is to delay our work by a few hours. We will resume our responsibilities now, and we will finish our task tonight. The House and Senate chambers will be restored good as new and ready for legislating in short order. The counting of the electoral votes is our sacred duty. Democracy's roots in this nation are deep, they're strong, and they will not be undone, ever, by a group of thugs. Democracy will triumph, as it has for centuries. So to my fellow Americans who were shocked and appalled by the images on their televisions today and who are worried about the future of this country, let me speak to you directly. The divisions in our country clearly run deep, but we are a resilient, forward-looking, and optimistic people, and we will begin the hard work of repairing this nation tonight, because here in America, we do hard things. In America, we always overcome our challenges. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I yield 2 minutes to the Senator from Oklahoma, Senator Lankford.
Senator from Oklahoma.
The Vice President, you said things more eloquently than how we say it in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, we'd say something like, why in God's name would someone think attacking law enforcement and occupying the United States Capitol is the best way to show that you're right? Why would you do that? Rioters and thugs don't run the Capitol. We're the United States of America. We disagree on a lot of things, and we have a lot of spirited debate in this room. But we talk it out, and we honor each other, even in our disagreement. That person is not my enemy. That's my fellow American. And while we disagree on things, and disagree strongly at times, we do not encourage what happened today, ever. I want to join my fellow senators in saying thank you to the Capitol Hill Police, the law enforcement, the National Guard, the Secret Service, who stood in harm's way. While we were here debating, they were pushing back. And I was literally interrupted mid-sentence speaking here because we were all unaware of what was happening right outside this room because of their faithfulness and because of what they have done. And I want to thank them. Ronald Reagan once said, peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. The peaceful people in my state in Oklahoma want their questions answered, but they don't want this, what happened today. They want to do the right thing, and they also want to do it the right way. They want to honor the constitutional process, but they also want to have debate about election security because they want to make sure it's right, which is why it's an important issue that still needs to be resolved. Transparency in government just doesn't seem like a bad idea. Obviously, the commission that we have asked for is not going to happen at this point, and I understand that. And we're headed towards tonight, towards the certification of Joe Biden to be the President of the United States. And we will work together in this body to be able to set a peaceful example for the days ahead. I yield the floor.
Democratic Leader.
Senator from Nevada, Senator Cortez Masto.
Senator from Nevada.
Mr. Vice President, I know that this room is full of leaders of both parties who love this country, and many believe that for America to succeed, our politics must find common ground. And that has never been clearer than today, when armed rioters stormed the U.S. Capitol, emboldened by President Trump's false and inflammatory rhetoric about the 2020 elections. I believe that we in this chamber have a special duty as leaders to work together to lower the temperature of our politics. And I hope that my colleagues would question the legitimacy of this election in Arizona and all of these other states, now see the dire and dangerous consequences of sowing doubt and uncertainty. I also know that as U.S. Senators, we all take solemnly the oath we swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. At this moment in history, I can think of nothing more patriotic than renewing our faith in the charters of freedom that our founding fathers crafted for our republic, starting with the fundamental American principle in our Declaration of Independence that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. The people have spoken in this election, and our only job here today is to do what they ask. It is not to argue election security. That's not the place for what we are doing today. Our Constitution specifically reserves to the people the right to meet in their respective states and vote for the president and vice president. As a result, individual states oversee and implement the election process, not the federal government. To guard against fraud or irregularities in the voting process, the states are required to have robust election security measures. Likewise, state legislatures have the opportunity to examine evidence of voter fraud before they certified their electoral college votes. And our courts, from district courts to the United States Supreme Court, adjudicate legal challenges and election disputes. All of those things happened after the 2020 election. State houses and courts across the country took allegations of voter fraud seriously and followed the constitutional process to hear challenges to this year's elections. No state found evidence of any widespread voter fraud, and neither did any court ask to review the state's findings. In Arizona, Republican Governor Doug Ducey, Democratic Secretary of State Katie Hobbs, Republican Attorney General Mark Brnovich, and State Supreme Court Chief Justice Robert Brutinel all certified the results of the election on November 30th. And we have heard, Arizonans have been voting by mail for almost 30 years. And Governor Ducey has expressed confidence in the state's process numerous times. In November, he said, "We do elections well here in Arizona. The system is strong, and that's why I have bragged on it so much." He further stated, "We have some of the strongest election laws in the country, laws that prioritize accountability and clearly lay out our procedures for conducting, canvassing, and even contesting the results." And they are right. Arizona has one of the most transparent election processes in the country, with built-in accountability, starting with internal auditing. We have heard unfounded allegations that voting machines in Arizona and elsewhere somehow changed vote tallies or somehow improperly rejected ballots while claiming to accept them. These allegations all ignore the fact that Arizona counties conducted ballot audits by hand to double-check the machine counts, and these audits found no widespread fraud or irregularities. Maricopa County, the county where more than 60% of the state population resides, conducted a post-election hand count audit in the week after the election, which showed perfect 100% accuracy in the machine tabulations. So why would we need, my colleagues, to call for a 10-day emergency audit to be conducted by a legislative commission when it's already been done by the state of Arizona. What happened to states' rights? The audit involved checking ballots for the presidential election, but also ballots for federal and state legislative elections. The audit report shows every precinct's machine and hand count totals for each of the races audited. And for every single race in every precinct, the difference between the hand count and the machine count was 0. Maricopa's audit report stated no discrepancies were found by the hand count audit boards. Seeking to find any reason to contest these results, some of the state Republicans then tried to claim that Maricopa County failed to follow state law in conducting this audit by selecting voting center locations to audit instead of voting precincts. This was wrong. And this, too, went to a court. In rejecting this claim, state court in Arizona found that the county followed the properly issued guidance on hand audit procedures from the Arizona Secretary of State. And the court found that Maricopa County officials, therefore, could not lawfully have performed the hand count audit the way the plaintiffs wanted it done. If they had done so, they would have exposed themselves to criminal punishment.
The senator's 5 minutes is expired.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would close by just saying, please, my colleagues, do not disenfranchise the voters of Arizona and certify their votes tonight. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Utah, Senator Lee.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, at the time I prepared my remarks for today, it seems like a lifetime ago. A lot's changed in the last few hours. And so I'm going to deliver some of the same remarks, but it has a little bit of a different feel than it would have just a few hours ago. My thoughts and prayers go out to the family members of those who have been injured or killed today. My heartfelt gratitude goes out to the Capitol Hill Police who valiantly defended our building and our lives. Well, it's true that legitimate concerns have been raised with regard to how some of the key battleground states conducted their presidential elections. This is not the end of the story. We each have to remember that we've sworn an oath to uphold, protect, and defend this document, written nearly 2.5 centuries ago by wise men raised up by God to that very purpose. That document makes clear what our role is and what it isn't. It makes clear who does what when it comes to deciding presidential elections. You see, because in our system of government, presidents are not directly elected. They're chosen by presidential electors. And the Constitution makes very clear under Article 2, Section 1, that the states shall appoint presidential electors according to procedures that their legislatures develop. Then comes the 12th Amendment. It explains what we're doing here today in the Capitol. It explains that the President of the Senate, the Vice President of the United States, shall open the ballots, and the votes shall then be counted. It's those words that confine, define, and constrain every scrap of authority that we have in this process. Our job is to open and then count. Open, then count. That's it. That's all there is. Now, there are, of course, rare instances in which multiple slates of electors can be submitted by the same state. That doesn't happen very often. It happened in 1960, it happened in 1876. Let's hope it doesn't ever happen again. In those rare moments, Congress has to make a choice. It has to decide which of the electoral votes will be counted and which will not. That did not happen here. Thank heavens, and let's hope that it never does. Now, many of my colleagues have raised objections or had previously stated their intent to raise objections with regard to these. I've spent an enormous time on this issue over the last few weeks. I've met with lawyers on both sides of the issue. I've met with lawyers representing the Trump campaign, reading everything I could find about the constitutional provisions in question. And I've spent a lot of time on the phone with legislators and other leaders from the contested states. I didn't initially declare my position because I didn't yet have one. I wanted to get the facts first, and I wanted to understand what was happening. I wanted to give the people serving in government in the contested states the opportunity to do whatever they felt they needed to do to make sure that their election was properly reflected. I spent an enormous amount of time reaching out to state government officials in those states, but in none of the contested states, no, not even one, did I discover any indication that there was any chance that any state legislature or secretary of state or governor or lieutenant governor had any intention to alter the slate of electors. That being the case, our job is a very simple one. This simply isn't how our federal system is supposed to work. That is to say, if you have concerns with the way that an election in the presidential race was handled in your state, the appropriate response is to approach your state legislature, first and foremost. These protests, from hearing from those who have raised concerns, they should have been focused on their state capitals, not their nation's capital. Because our role is narrow, our role is defined, our role is limited. Yes, we are the election judges when it comes to members elected to our own body. And yes, the House of Representatives, they're the judges of their own races there. We also have the authority to prescribe, as a Congress, rules governing the time, place, and manner of elections for senators and representatives. There is no corresponding authority with respect to presidential elections. None whatsoever. It doesn't exist. Our job is to convene, to open the ballots, and to count them. That's it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Well, they shouldn't be giving that shot to anyone, but they certainly should. Democratic leader. To him. That's a big
Colorado, Mr. Banks.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, it's been a terrible day for everybody here and for our country. One of the things I was thinking about today is something I often think about when I'm on this floor, which is that the founders of this country, the people that wrote our Constitution, actually knew our history better than we know our history. And I was thinking about that history today as we saw the mob riot in Washington, D.C., thinking about what the founders were thinking about when they wrote our Constitution, which was what happened to the Roman Republic, when armed gangs doing the work for politicians prevented Rome from casting their ballots for consuls, for praetors, for senators. These were the offices in Rome. And these armed gangs ran through the streets of Rome, keeping elections from being started, keeping elections from ever being called. And in the end, because of that, the Roman Republic fell and a dictator took its place. And that was the end of the Roman Republic, or any republic for that matter, until this beautiful Constitution was written in the United States of America. So it is my fervent hope that the way that we respond to this today, my dear colleagues, is that we give the biggest bipartisan vote we can in support of our democracy and in support of our Constitution and in rejection for what we saw today and what the Roman Republic saw in its own time. There's a tendency around this place, I think, to always believe that we're the first people to confront something when that's seldom the case, and to underappreciate what the effect of our actions will be. We need to deeply appreciate in this moment our obligation to the Constitution, our obligation to the democracy, our obligation to the Republic. There are people in this chamber that have twisted the words of a statute written in the 19th century that was meant to actually settle our electoral disputes, to leave them with the states. As the senator from Utah was saying, to give us a ministerial role, except in very rare circumstances. That's what that law is about, that the senator of Texas was talking about today. And that's the law that's leading us to be asked to overturn the judgments of 60 courts in America, many of them courts in Arizona, some of whom have howled the president's lawyers out of the courtrooms because there's no evidence of fraud. And by the way, the fact that 37% or 39% of Americans think there's no evidence of fraud or think there's evidence of fraud does not mean there is fraud. If you turned a blind eye to a conspiracy theory, you can't now come to the floor of the Senate and say you're ignoring the people who believe the election was stolen. Go out there and tell them the truth, which is that every single member of this Senate knows this election wasn't stolen. And that we, just as in the Roman Republic, have a responsibility to protect the independence of the judiciary from politicians who will stop at nothing to hold on to power. There's nothing new about that either. That's been true since the First Republic was founded. So now we find ourselves in a position just days after many senators here swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Every single member of the House of Representatives swore the same oath as well. And I think we've got a solemn obligation and responsibility here to prove once again that this country is a nation of laws and not of men. And the only result that we can reach together is one that rejects the claim of the senator from Texas and the other members of the House and Senate who seek to overturn the decisions that are made by the states, by the voters in the states, and by the courts. If we follow what they have proposed, we will be the ones that will have disenfranchised every single person who cast a vote in this election, whether they voted for the president or they didn't. I urge you to reject this, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to serve with every single one of you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Georgia, Senator Loeffler.
Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, when I arrived in Washington this morning, I fully intended to object to the certification of electoral votes. However, the events that have transpired today have forced me to reconsider, and I cannot now in good conscience object to the certification of these electors. The violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect, the sanctity of the American democratic process. And I thank law enforcement for keeping us safe. I believe that there were last-minute changes to the November 2020 election process and serious irregularities that resulted in too many Americans losing confidence not only in the integrity of our elections, but in the power of the ballot as a tool of democracy. Too many Americans are frustrated at what they see as an unfair system. Nevertheless, there is no excuse for the events that took place in these chambers today, and I pray that America never suffers such a dark day again. Though the fate of this vote is clear, the future of the American people's faith in the core institution of this democracy remains uncertain. We as a body must turn our focus to protecting the integrity of our elections and restoring every American's faith that their voice and their vote matters. America is a divided country with serious differences, but it is still the greatest country on earth. There can be no disagreement that upholding democracy is the only path to preserving our republic. I yield the floor.
Democratic Leader.
Minutes to Senator Booker and 2.5 minutes to Senator Kaine. in reverse order.
Mr. President and my colleagues,
Senator from Virginia.
I applaud the comments of my colleague from Georgia deeply. My first job after school was in Macon, Georgia, working for a federal judge, Lanier Anderson. And I learned a lot about integrity and a lot about law from him. I also learned some sad lessons that in the history of Georgia, and indeed Virginia and many states, so many people, especially people of color, have been disenfranchised over the course of our history. Our late friend, John Lewis, congressman from Georgia, was savagely beaten on Bloody Sunday just for marching for voting rights. That act of violence inspired this body, the U.S. Senate, to come together in March of 1965 and work to pass, in a bipartisan fashion, the Voting Rights Act. We should be coming together today after acts of violence as a United States Senate to affirm the votes of all who cast ballots in November. Instead, we're contemplating an unprecedented objection that would be a massive disenfranchisement of American voters. The Georgia result was very clear, a 12,000 vote margin, 2 certifications by Republican officials, 4 separate recounts and canvasses, 7 lawsuits, as in the other states. If we object to results like this, the message is so clear. We are saying to states, no matter how secure and accurate your elections are, we'll gladly overthrow them if we don't like who you voted for. But more importantly, what we'll be saying, really what we'll be doing, is as the body that acted together to guarantee Americans the right to vote, we will become the agent of one of the most massive disenfranchisements in the history of this country. So I urge all of my colleagues, please oppose these objections. Thank you, and I yield to my colleague from New Jersey.
Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. Vice President, I can only think of 2 times in American history that individuals laid siege to our Capitol, stormed our sacred civic spaces, and tried to upend and overrun this government. One was in the War of 1812, and the other one was today. What's interesting about the parallel between the two is they both were waving flags to a sole sovereign, to an individual, surrendering democratic principles to the cult of personality. One was a monarch in England, and the other were the flags I saw all over our Capitol, including in the hallways and in this room, to a single person named Donald Trump.
46 seconds left in the first quarter.
The sad difference between these 2 times is one was yet another nation in the history of our country that tried to challenge the United States of America. But this time, we brought this hell upon ourselves.
38 seconds left now in the first quarter.
My colleague from Texas said that this was a moment where there were unprecedented allegations of voter fraud. Yes, that is true. They were unprecedented when the president, before the election even happened, said, if I lose this election, then the election was rigged. That's unprecedented. It's unprecedented before the night of the voting, even the counting of the vote was even done, that he called it rigged. And it's unprecedented that he is fanning the flames of conspiracy theory to create a smokescreen in this nation to cover what he is trying to do, which is undermine our democratic principles. But it's not just that. The shame of this day is it's being aided and abetted by good Americans who are falling prey, who are choosing Trump over truth, who are surrendering to the passion of lies as opposed to standing up and speaking truth to power, who are trying to fundraise off of the shame of conspiracy theories as opposed to doing the incalculably valuable patriotic thing to speak truth to our nation. Our democracy is wounded, and I saw it when I saw pictures of yet another insurgency, of a flag of another group of Americans who tried to challenge our nation. I saw the flag of the Confederacy there. What will we do? How will we confront this shame? How will we confront this dark second time in American history? I pray that we remember a Georgian. His words, all I can say is we must in spirit join together like those Georgians on a bridge called the Edmund Pettus, who joined hands, who were called threats to our democracy, who were called outrageous epithets when they sought to expand our democracy, to save it, to heal it, when they joined arm in arm and said what we should say now, commit ourselves to that ideal, that together we shall overcome.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Nebraska, Senator Sass.
Senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, thank you. And Mr. Vice President, let me just say before I begin, thank you for the way you have fulfilled your constitutional duties and your oath of office today. It obviously hasn't been easy. Colleagues, today has been ugly. And when I came to the floor this morning, I planned to talk about the lesson of 1801, because I'm kind of a history nerd, and I wanted to celebrate the glories of the peaceful transition of power across our nation's history. It feels a little naive now to talk about ways that American civics might be something that could unite us and bring us back together. 1801 blew everybody's mind all over the world, by the way. John Adams loses to Thomas Jefferson, and Adams willingly leaves the executive mansion and moves back to Massachusetts, and Jefferson peacefully assumes power. And people all over Europe said, that must be fake news. Those must be bad reports. There's no way any executive would ever willingly lay down power. And yet Adams, in defeat, did something glorious to give all of us a gift. I wanted to celebrate that, and it feels a little bit harder now. This building has been desecrated. Blood has been spilled in the hallways. I was with octogenarian members of this chamber that needed to have troops and police stabilize them to get down the stairs at a time when a lot of our staffs were panicked and under their desks and not knowing what was going to happen to them. It was ugly today. But you know what? It turns out that when something's ugly, talking about beauty isn't just permissible. Talking about beauty is obligatory in a time like that. Why? Why would we talk about beauty after the ugliness of today? Because our kids need to know that this isn't what America is. What happened today isn't what America is. They've been given a glorious inheritance. This is the 59th presidential election. If the vice president wasn't the chair, and if the president pro tem was, I'd have made some joke that Chuck Grassley has voted in 2/3 of those 59 presidential elections. He's laughing. It's not as good as Hit Dear, Dear Dead, but it's still got a Grassley laugh. I don't think we want to tell the Americans that come after us that this republic is broken, that this is just a banana republic, that our institutions can't be trusted. I don't think we want that. We don't want that in this body. We don't want that in our hometowns. I don't think we want to tell our kids that America's best days are behind us, because it's not true. That's not who we are. America isn't Hatfield's and McCoy's blood feud forever. America's a union. There's a lot that's broken in this country, but not anything that's so big that the American people can't rebuild it, that freedom and community and entrepreneurial effort and that neighborhoods can't rebuild. Nothing that's broken is so big that we can't fix it. Generations of our forefathers and our foremothers, probably not a word, our ancestors, have spilled blood to defend the glories of this republic. Why would they do that? Because America is the most exceptional nation in the history of the world, and because the Constitution is the greatest political document that's ever been written. Most governments in the past have said might makes right, and we saw some of that hooligan nuttery today. Might makes right. No, it doesn't. God gives us rights by nature, and government is just our shared project to secure those rights. America has always been about what we choose to do together, the way we reaffirm our constitutional system, where we've got some governmental tasks, and we all in this body could do better at those governmental tasks, but the heart of America is not government. The center of America is not Washington, D.C. The center of America is the neighborhoods where 330 million Americans are raising their kids and trying to put food on the table and trying to love their neighbor. That's the center of America. We're not supposed to be the most important people in America. We're supposed to be servant leaders who try to maintain a framework for ordered liberty so that there's a structure that back home where they live, they can get from the silver frame of structure and order to the golden apple at the center, as Washington would have said it, which is the things that they build together. The places where they coach Little League, the places where they invite people to synagogue or church. Sometimes the big things we do together are governmental, like kicking Hitler's ass or like going to the moon. Sometimes there is governmental stuff, but the heart of America is about places where moms and dads are raising kids, and we're supposed to serve them by maintaining order and by rejecting violence. You can't do big things like that if you hate your neighbors. You can't do big things together as Americans if you think other Americans are the enemy. Look, there's a lot of uncertainty about the future. I get it. There's a lot that does need to be rebuilt. But if you're angry, I want to beg you, don't let the screamers who monetize hate have the final word. Don't let nihilists become your drug dealers. There are some who want to burn it all down. We met some of them today, but they aren't going to win. Don't let them be your prophets. Instead, organize, persuade, but most importantly, love your neighbor. Visit the widower down the street who's lonely and doesn't want to tell anybody that his wife died. He doesn't have a lot of friends. Shovel somebody's neighbor. Shovel somebody's driveway. You can't hate somebody who just shoveled your driveway. The heart of life is about community and neighborhood, and we're supposed to be servant leaders. The constitutional system is still the greatest order for any government ever, and it's our job to steward it and protect it. Let's remember that today when we vote.
Wiseman's got his second basket of the game.
Democratic leader.
This is non-existent like they were there.
Senator from Illinois.
Lawyer caught a train to Washington. His name was Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't his first trip here. He'd served as a congressman 15 years before, and he returned in the beginning of the Civil War to serve as president. It was a different place than he knew it as congressman, and 15 years had changed a lot. The Spriggs boarding house across the street, which is now the Library of Congress, was gone, and this building was changing. Big changes. They're building a dome on the Capitol. But they were also in the earliest days of a war, and President Lincoln was counseled, stop building the dome. It costs too much money, and we can't spend any more time on it. And he said, no, we're going to build that dome, and we're going to finish it. That dome and this building will be a symbol of this country that will survive the Civil War and come back strong. So they built the dome, they won the war, and since those days, that dome and this building have been a symbol to this country, a symbol of unity and of hope. Tourists come through here before COVID-19 by the tens of thousands. And if you've ever noticed their tours, they're often shushed. People are saying, show some respect for this building. We know this building in the Rotunda is a place where some of the greatest American heroes of both political parties lie in state, and we go there to honor them. We know this building because we work here. We enact laws here that change America. We gather for State of the Union messages from presidents and honor the people in the gallery. This is a special place. This is a sacred place. But this sacred place was desecrated by a mob today. on our watch. This temple to democracy was defiled by thugs who roamed the halls and sat in that chair, Mr. Vice President, the one that you vacated at 2:15 this afternoon, sat and posed for pictures, those who were roaming around this chamber. What brought this on? Did this mob spring spontaneously from America? No. This mob was invited to come to Washington on this day by this president for one reason, because he knew the Electoral College vote was going to be counted this day. He wanted this mob to disrupt the constitutional process which we are part of. This mob was inspired by a president who cannot accept defeat. If you wonder whether I'm going too far in what I say, just read the transcript with the Secretary of State from Georgia and listen to this president's wild conspiracy theories, one after the other, swatted down by that Republican elected official and his attorney as having no basis in fact. This president begs, he coaxes, he even threatens that Secretary of State to find the votes he needs. In any other venue, that would be a simple, obvious crime. The lengths he will go to are obvious. The Texas senator says to us, well, many people still agree with him, you know. When it gets down to the bottom line, many people have fallen for this presidential position that it must have been a rigged election if I lost. Well, I would say that after we've lost count, 57 lawsuits, 62 lawsuits, I've heard so many numbers, after 90 different judges, after this president took his case, the best he could put together, to the highest court in the land across the street, where he had personally chosen 3 justices on the Supreme Court, I say to the senator from Texas, you know much more about that court than I do. I don't believe they let that paper that he sent up there even hit the desk before they laughed it out of the court. And that's the best he had to offer. No evidence whatsoever of this rigged election and this fraudulence. The senator from Texas says, we just want to create a little commission. 10 days, we're going to audit all the states, particularly the ones in contention here, and find out what actually occurred. And it really draws its parallel in 1876, Hayes and Tilden. Don't forget what that commission, that so-called political compromise, achieved. It was not just some ordinary governmental commission. It was a commission that killed Reconstruction, that established Jim Crow, that even after a civil war which tore this nation apart, it re-enslaved African Americans. And it was a commission that invited the voter suppression we are still fighting today in America. Let me close by saying this. The vote we're going to have here is a clear choice of whether we are going to feed the beast of ignorance or we are going to tell the truth to the American people. We saw that beast today roaming the halls. Let's not invite it back.
Majority Leader.
President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Kansas, Senator Marshall.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. President. Freedom of speech and the freedom to protest are provided in our Constitution. And while I share the same frustrations many Americans have over the presidential election, the violence and mob rule which occurred at the U.S. Capitol today and across the country over the past year are unacceptable, and I condemn them at the highest level. And like all of us in the chamber, I'm thankful for the heroic law enforcement officers who worked feverishly to restore order so that we get back to the electoral certification process. During my 29-year career as an obstetrician and gynecologist, too often I had to sit down with patients and give them a very bad diagnosis. It might have been a young mother of 3 who I delivered all 3 of her babies, now with metastatic breast cancer. Or perhaps another woman with advanced cervical or ovarian cancer, all with a very challenging prognosis. But before I sat down with each one of those patients, I carefully reviewed all their labs, their x-rays, and their pathology to make sure I had the facts straight But at the end of the day, my final recommendation was always going to be a recommendation from my heart. I want my fellow Kansans and all Americans to know that I've given as much consideration and thought surrounding the issue objecting to a state's electoral college votes as I did considering the treatment plan for a serious health concern. And today's decision, once again, is from my heart. Mr. President, I rise today to restore integrity to our republic. And I rise to join the many of our colleagues who are all concerned for current and future generations. We must restore faith and confidence in one of our republic's most hallowed, patriotic duties, voting. There is no question our U.S. Constitution empowers state legislatures to execute free, legal, and fair elections. Unfortunately, in several states, the clear authority of those state legislatures to determine the rules for voting were usurped by governors, secretaries of states, and activist courts. Our laws and Constitution should always be followed, especially in a time of crisis. I don't rise to undo a state's legally obtained electoral college votes. Rather, I rise in hopes of improving the integrity of the ballot to hold states accountable to the time-proven constitutional system of the Electoral College. This is why I urge the formation of an electoral commission to give constructive suggestions and recommendations that states can make to make our elections once again safe, free, and fair after a year of jarring irregularities. We must and will have a peaceful transition to power. To all my fellow Americans, I have no doubt that our republic can grow stronger through this difficult day. May God bless this great republic. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Democratic leader.
Senator Duckworth.
Senator from Illinois.
President, in 2004, I packed up my rucksack, laced up my boots, and deployed to Iraq, ready to sacrifice whatever was asked of me, all because I love this nation, willing to sacrifice my life if needed. Because I believe in the sanctity of our electoral system, which had declared George W. Bush my commander-in-chief. I earned my wounds, proudly fighting in a war I did not support, on the orders of a president I did not vote for, because I believed in, and I still do believe in, the values of our nation, because I believe in a government of, by, and for the people, where voters choose who leads them, not the other way around. I have spent my entire adult life defending our democracy, but I never thought it would be necessary to defend it from an attempted violent overthrow in our nation's own Capitol building. Well, I refuse to let anyone intent on instigating chaos or inciting violence deter me from carrying out my constitutional duties. You know, when my Army buddies and I raised our right hands, when the 45,000 troops in Arizona raised their right hands and swore to protect and defend the Constitution, we did not qualify our oath by saying that we'd follow orders only when the commander-in-chief was someone whose election we were happy with. Just like when every senator in this chamber was sworn into office, we didn't mutter under our breath that we discharge our duties only when it served our political interests or helped us to avoid the wrath of a petty, insecure, wannabe tin pot dictator on the precipice of losing power and relevance. No, there is no ambiguity here. Joe Biden won the election with a record number of votes. Republican officials nationwide confirmed those results, including in Arizona, as has judge after Trump-appointed judge. Even Trump's Attorney General admitted that the United States Department of Justice had not found widespread fraud that would have affected the outcome. Yet still, many of my Republican colleagues are asking us to ignore all of that. With no evidence of their own, they're asking us to ignore court rulings, ignore Republican election officials, and even worse, ignore the will of the people across this vast, great nation. By trying to overturn this election, they are placing more trust in Reddit conspiracy theories over the Constitution, proving that appeasing Trump is more important to them than protecting the most basic tenet of our republic, the adherence to free and fair elections. There's one thing I know, it's that my troops didn't sign up to defend our democracy in war zones thousands of miles away only to watch it crumble in these hallowed halls here at home. Yet that is what this effort amounts to, an attempt to subvert our democracy, and in the process, it is threatening what makes America American. Because in this country, the power of the people has always mattered more than the people in power. That is the ideal that this nation was founded upon. That is why a few patriots threw some tea in Boston Harbor, why Washington crossed the Delaware, why suffragists were arrested a century ago, and why my friend John Lewis crossed that bridge in Selma in 1965. It is why millions spent a Tuesday in November standing in line, braving a pandemic to make their voices heard. Listen, this administration has always had an adversarial relationship with the truth. Trump always cries conspiracy, always foments chaos whenever something doesn't go his way. But today, we here in this chamber have the opportunity to prove that here in this country, truth matters, that right matters, that the will of the people matters more than the whims of any single powerful individual. I have no tea to throw in Boston Harbor tonight, and I regret that I have no rucksack to pack for my country, no Black Hawk to pilot, nor am I asking for any grand gesture from my Republican colleagues. All that I'm asking of you is to reflect on the oaths that you have sworn, on the damage done to our union today, and on the sacrifices made by those who've given so much to this nation. From the service members at Fort Huachuca and Marine Corps Air Station Yuma to the marchers who bent America's moral arc a bit more towards justice with every single step that they took, every bridge that they crossed, then ask yourself whether the democracy they were willing to bleed for, the country that each of us in this chamber has sworn to defend, is worth damaging in order to protect the porcelain ego of a man who treats the Constitution as if it were little more than a yellowing piece of paper. I think we all know the right answer.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Kentucky, Senator Paul.
Senator from Kentucky.
I wrote a speech for today. I was planning to say that I fear the chaos of establishing a precedent that Congress can overturn elections. Boy, was I right. Chaos, anarchy. The violence today was wrong and un-American. The vote we are about to cast is incredibly important. Now more than ever, the question is, should Congress override the certified results from the states and nullify the states' rights to conduct elections? The vote today is not a protest. The vote today is literally to overturn elections. We've been told that this is a protest. Well, this is about an electoral commission. No, it's not. It's about whether to seat the electors that have been certified by a state. It's not about an electoral commission. It's not about a protest. You can go outside if you want to protest. This is about overturning a state-certified election. If you vote to overturn these elections, wouldn't it be the opposite of what states' rights Republicans have always advocated for? This would doom the Electoral College forever. It was never intended by our founders that Congress have the power to overturn state-certified elections. My oath to the Constitution doesn't allow me to disobey the law. I can't vote to overturn the verdict of states. Such a vote would be to overturn everything held dear by those of us who support the rights of states in this great system of federalism that was bequeathed to us by our founders. The Electoral College was created to devolve the power of selecting presidential electors to the states. The Electoral College is, without question, an inseparable friend to those who believe that every American across our vast country deserves to be heard. If Congress were to give the power to overturn the state's election, what terrible chaos would ensue every 4 years? Imagine the furor against the Electoral College if Congress becomes a forum to overturn states' Electoral College slates. It's one thing to be angry. It's another to focus one's anger in constructive ways. That hasn't happened today, to say the least. We simply cannot destroy the Constitution, our laws, and the Electoral College in the process. I hope as the nation's anger cools, we can channel that energy into essential electoral reforms at the state level. America's admired around the world for our free elections. We absolutely must fix this mess and restore confidence and integrity to our elections. We must.
Democratic leader. Senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I think like most of us, I'm still pretty reeling from what happened today. What I was going to talk about was the work that I'm most proud of since I've been here, with my good friend Richard Burr and all the members of the Intelligence Committee, about a multi-year report we did into foreign interference in our elections. Probably our top recommendation of that 5-volume bipartisan report was that any official or candidate should use restraint and caution when questioning results of our elections. Because when you do so, you often carry out the goals of our foreign adversaries. Use caution because whether knowingly or unknowingly, whether that adversary is in Russia or China or Iran, their goals are pretty simple. They want to make it appear to Americans, to folks around the world, to their own people, that there's nothing special about American democracy. I was going to try in a feeble way to maybe reach some of the rhetorical heights of Ben Sass, and I knew I couldn't do that. So instead, I know I'm violating rules here. Today's the day for violating rules. So this is a photo that appears today on one of the most prominent German newspapers. You don't need to draw up it. You can draw up photos from any newspaper or any television feed anywhere across the world. And what is this photo of? It's of thugs. Thugs in the halls of this Capitol, diminishing everything we say we believe in this democracy. When you look at those images, realize those images are priceless for our adversaries. God willing, tonight, in an overwhelming way, we're going to take a small step in a bipartisan way to start restoring that trust of our people and hopefully the billions of people around the world who believe in that notion of American democracy. Remember, these images will still endure. I yield back.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the senator from Missouri, Senator Hawley.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, thank you. I want to begin this evening by saying thank you to the men and women of the Capitol Hill Police, the armed, the National Guardsmen, the Metropolitan Police, and others who came to this Capitol, who put their lives on the line to protect everyone here working inside of it. And I want to thank law enforcement all across this country, in my home state of Missouri and everywhere else who do that day in and day out. And I just want to acknowledge that when it comes to violence, this has been a terrible year in America this last year. We've seen a lot of violence against law enforcement, and today we saw it here in the capital of the United States. And in this country, in the United States of America, we cannot say emphatically enough, violence is not how you achieve change. violence is not how you achieve something better. Our Constitution was built and put into place so that there would be, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, no appeal from ballots to bullets, which is what we saw, unfortunately, attempted tonight. There is no place for that in the United States of America. And that's why I submit to my colleagues that what we're doing here tonight is actually very important. Because for those who have concerns about the integrity of our elections, those who have concerns about what happened in November, this is the appropriate means. This is the lawful place where those objections and concerns should be heard. This is the forum that the law provides for, our laws provide for those concerns to be registered, not through violence, not by appealing from ballots to bullets, but here in this lawful process. And so to those who say that this is just a formality today, an antique ceremony that we've engaged in for a couple of hundred years, I can't say that I agree. I can't say that our precedents suggest that. I actually think it's very vital what we do. The opportunity to be heard, to register objections is very vital because this is the place where those objections are to be heard and dealt with, debated, and finally resolved. In this lawful means, peacefully, without violence, without attacks, without bullets. And so, Mr. President, let me just say now briefly, in lieu of speaking about it later, a word about Pennsylvania, which is a state that I have been focused on, objected to, as an example of why people are concerned, millions of Americans concerned about our election integrity. The state of Pennsylvania, quite apart from allegations of any fraud, you have a state constitution that has been interpreted for over a century to say that there is no mail-in balloting permitted except for in very narrow circumstances that's also provided for in the law. And yet, last year, Pennsylvania elected officials passed a whole new law that allows universal mail-in balloting and did it irregardless of what the Pennsylvania Constitution said. And then when Pennsylvania citizens tried to go and be heard on this subject before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, they were dismissed on grounds of procedure, timeliness, in violation of that Supreme Court's own precedent. So the merits of the case have never been heard. The constitutionality of the statute actually has never been defended. I'm not aware of any court that has passed on its constitutionality. Actually, I'm not aware of anybody who's defended the constitutionality. And this was the statute that governed this last election, in which there are over 2.5 million mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. This is my point, that this is the forum. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court hasn't heard the case. There's no other court to go to hear the case in the state. And so this is the appropriate place for these concerns to be raised, which is why I have raised them here today. And I hope that this body will not miss the opportunity to take affirmative action to address the concerns of so many millions of Americans, to say to millions of Americans tonight that violence is never warranted, that violence will not be tolerated, that those who engage in it will be prosecuted, but that this body will act to address the concerns of all Americans across the country. We do need an investigation into irregularities, fraud. We do need a way forward together. We need election security reforms. I bet my friends on the other side of the aisle don't disagree with that. We need to find a way to move forward on that together so that the American people from both parties, all walks of life, can have confidence in their elections and that we can arrange ourselves under the rule of law that we share together. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Democratic leader.
Senator from Pennsylvania, Mr. Casey.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Watch this shot. It's so pretty.
I rise tonight to defend the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to defend the more than 6.9 million voters who voted in this election, and to condemn in the strongest possible terms this attempt to disenfranchise the voters of Pennsylvania based upon a lie, a falsehood. That same lie sowed the seeds of today's violence and today's lawlessness here in the Capitol. One of my constituents, Susan from the Lehigh Valley, the community of our state where Senator Toomey lives, recently wrote to my office and perhaps said it best. She said, and I quote, "We cannot allow anybody to overturn the legal votes of the citizens of Pennsylvania."
This would be the ultimate destruction of our democracy, unquote. Susan had it right. We cannot allow anybody, and she put that word in all caps, to overturn the legal votes of the people of our state. Let me address the allegation regarding the Pennsylvania Constitution and the General Assembly. Somehow that the General Assembly didn't have the authority to enact no-excuse mail-in voting, that process for the people of our state. First, the law in question, Act 77, was passed in 2019 and was implemented without any serious question as to its constitutionality. The law was passed by a Republican-controlled General Assembly, House and Senate. It was only after the 2020 election, when it became clear that President-elect Joe Biden won Pennsylvania by a little more than 80,000 votes, did some Republican politicians in our state decide to challenge the constitutionality of the law. Second, Act 77 is plainly constitutional. My colleagues allege that the state constitution requires in-person voting except under limited circumstances. This is not true. While Pennsylvania lays out specific situations in which absentee voting is required, there is no in-person requirement in our state's constitution. The Constitution sets a floor, not a ceiling, for this type of voting. Second, apart from the argument made by my colleague, there's bipartisan agreement across our state, at the local, state, and federal level, that our election was fair, secure, and lawful. On Monday, my colleague from Pennsylvania, Senator Toomey, wrote in an op-ed, and I'm quoting, "The evidence is overwhelming that Joe Biden won this election," unquote. There's simply no evidence to justify the outrageous claims of widespread voter fraud or election irregularities suggested by those seeking to overturn the election. 60 cases, court after court, all throughout our state and throughout the country, including the Supreme Court, dealing with this bizarre argument that we know is based upon that lie. In one court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit, Judge Bibas, appointed by President Trump, he said, quote, "The campaign's claims have no merit," unquote. The United States, he said, has free and fair elections, which are the lifeblood of our democracy. Charges require specific allegations and then proof. We have neither here, unquote. So said Judge Bibas. Finally, Mr. President, a word about those election officials who did such work. These election officials all across our state, Republicans and Democrats, from red counties and blue counties, they did their jobs. They are patriots. And these objections are an attack on these Pennsylvania public servants. Give you one example. Republican Commissioner Al Schmidt, I should say, of Philadelphia. He wrote, and I said, and he wrote, as I will quote as follows, quote, "There really should not be a disagreement, regardless of party affiliation, when we're talking about counting votes by eligible voters. It's not a very controversial thing, or at least it shouldn't be," unquote. After Election Day, Commissioner Al Schmidt, his family, and his colleagues were subjected to death threats simply because he was trying to do his job with integrity. It calls to mind, Mr. President, that great line from America the Beautiful, "Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that sees beyond the years." These election officials, like so many of our patriots, we heard from Senator Duckworth tonight, a real patriot. These patriots did their job. Let's support these patriots. Vote against this objection.
Majority Leader. I yield 5 minutes to the Senator from Utah, Senator Romney.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, today was heartbreaking, and I was shaken to the core as I thought about the people I met in China and Russia and Afghanistan and Iraq and other places who yearn for freedom and who look to this building and these shores as a place of hope. and I saw the images being broadcast around the world, and it breaks my heart. I have 25 grandchildren. Many of them were watching TV, thinking about this building, whether their grandpa was okay. I knew I was okay. I must tell you as well, I was proud to serve with these men and women. This is an extraordinary group of people. I'm proud to be a member of the United States Senate and meet with people of integrity as we do here today. Now we gather due to a selfish man's injured pride and the outrage of supporters who he has deliberately misinformed for the past 2 months and stirred to action this very morning. What happened here today was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States. Those who choose to continue to support his dangerous gambit by objecting to the results of a legitimate democratic election will forever be seen as being complicit in an unprecedented attack against our democracy. Fairly or not, they'll be remembered for their role in this shameful episode in American history. That will be their legacy. I salute Senator Langford, Loeffler, and Braun and Daines, and I'm sure others, who in the light of today's outrage have withdrawn their objection. For any who remain insistent on an audit in order to satisfy the many people who believe that the election was stolen, I'd offer this perspective. No congressional audit is ever going to convince these voters, particularly when the president will continue to say that the election was stolen. The best way we can show respect for the voters who are upset is by telling them the truth. That's the burden. That's the duty of leadership. The truth is that President-elect Biden won the election. President Trump lost. I've had that experience myself. It's no fun. Scores of courts, the president's own attorney general, state election officials, both Republican and Democrat, have reached that unequivocal decision. And in light of today's sad circumstances, I asked my colleague, do we weigh our own political fortunes more heavily than we weigh the strength of our republic, the strength of our democracy, and the cause of freedom? What's the weight of personal acclaim compared to the weight of conscience? Leader McConnell said that the vote today is the most important in his 36 years of public service. Think of that. Authorizing 2 wars, voting on 2 impeachments. He said that not because the vote reveals something about the election, it's because this vote reveals something about us. I urge my colleagues to move forward with completing the electoral count, to refrain from further objections, and to unanimously affirm the legitimacy of the presidential election. Thank you, Mr. President.
Democratic leader.
Senator from New Hampshire, Senator Shaheen.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, on January 3rd, I, along with 31 of my colleagues, stood in this chamber and swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's both ironic and deeply disappointing that only 3 days after swearing these oaths, some of my colleagues are willfully coming close to breaking this promise. Since 1797, each U.S. president has peacefully handed over power to the next. And that will happen again on January 20th, when Donald Trump, despite the protesters today, the violence today, when Donald Trump leaves the White House at noon and Joe Biden becomes president. And we've heard tonight from both Democrats and Republicans about the importance of the voters speaking in the election, and about the fact that there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. But this is not just an issue for us here in the United States. This is an issue for nascent democracies around the world who, as Senator Romney said, look to the United States as an example. We are the shining city on the hill. We give those struggling under oppression hope for a better future. Now, like so many of us in this chamber, I've traveled to developing democracies around the world, to Afghanistan and Iraq, to the Western Balkans, to Africa, to the country of Georgia. I went there with my colleague, Senator Rich. In 2012, we went to Georgia to observe officially, on behalf of the Senate, the election between outgoing President Mikhail Saakashvili and his United National Movement Party, and the challenge by Georgian Dream, which was a newly formed party supported and funded by billionaire oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. It was a battle for parliament, but also for control of the government. Senator Risch and I visited multiple polling places on Election Day, and we agreed with the international assessment that that election was free and fair and that Georgian Dream were the winners. But there was real concern in the country that Saakashvili was going to refuse to give up power, that would lead to violence, it would end the nascent democratic reforms that were happening in that former Soviet republic. And so Senator Risch and I, the day after the election, went to visit President Saakashvili to try and talk him out of staying in power. And I remember very clearly going to his home, and we sat down with him and we pointed out that the hallmark of a democracy, what he had worked so hard for in his 8 years as president of Georgia, the hallmark of that was to turn over power in a peaceful election to the person that the voters chose. Well, President Saakashvili listened to us, and he did leave office peacefully. But it's important that future generations recognize that America, like democracies everywhere, depends on a peaceful transition of power, on believing in what the voters say and in ensuring that happens. Unfortunately, we've heard from some senators today who have been enabling President Trump's willful disregard of the votes of our citizenry, even as they speak out against foreign leaders who ignore their own people. They will fail, and history will remember them. And I hope that future generations will view the actions of some of those folks today as little more than an unfortunate anomaly. Future opportunists may use this ill-fated effort to seek short-term political gain over the long-term stability of our republic. But for the sake of our great country and America's standing in the world, I ask my colleagues today to fully endorse the results of the free and fair election and set aside this partisan attempt to subvert the will of the people. We should be venerating the peaceful transition of power, even if our own preferred candidate didn't win. That is, after all, who we are in the United States of America. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from Ohio, Senator Portman.
Senator from Ohio.
Mr. Vice President, you have fulfilled your duties as President of the Senate tonight with distinction, and we all appreciate it. I thought about changing my mind and not speaking tonight, given the lateness of the hour, and I know all of my colleagues would have appreciated that greatly. But I felt it was necessary to speak because I want the American people, particularly my constituents in Ohio to see that we will not be intimidated, that we will not be disrupted from our work, that here in the citadel of democracy, we will continue to do the work of the people. Mob rule is not going to prevail here. Now, let's face it, we did not reclaim this chamber tonight. Brave and selfless law enforcement officers stood in the breach and ensured that the citadel of democracy would be protected and that we would be defended. And we are deeply grateful for that, as is the nation. I've listened carefully to the comments of my colleagues, and I've listened over the past couple of weeks as this issue has been discussed, and I tell you, for me, it's not a hard decision. I stand with the Constitution. I stand with what the Constitution makes clear. The people and the states hold the power here, not us. My oath to the Constitution and my reverence for our democratic principles make it easy for me to confirm these state certifications. By the way, I posed this process some 15 years ago when some Democrats chose to object to the electors from my home state of Ohio after the 2004 elections. I opposed it then, and I oppose it now. I said at the time, Congress must not thwart the will of the people. That's what we would be doing. Let's assume for a moment that those who object to the certifications are right, that the Constitution intended that a bare majority of members of Congress could circumvent the states that have chosen to certify the popular votes of their own state citizens. I ask the objectors to think about the precedent that would be set if we were to do that. What if the majority in the House and the Senate was of the other party when a presidential candidate of our party came through a close presidential election? Would you want a Congress controlled by the Democrats to play the role you now intend for us? It is asking Congress to substitute its judgment for the judgment of the voters, and its judgment for the judgment of the states that certified the results. And even forgetting the dangerous precedent that would be set, what would be the basis for objecting in this election? Look, I voted for President Trump. I supported him because I believe the Trump administration's policies are better for Ohio and for the country. And I supported the Trump campaign's right to pursue recounts. They had every right to do it. And legal challenges. I agree that there were instances of fraud and irregularities in the 2020 elections. I think we all do. And by the way, there is fraud and irregularities in every presidential election. But it is also true that after 2 months of recounts and legal challenges, not a single state recount changed the result. And of the dozens of lawsuits filed, not one found evidence of fraud or irregularities widespread enough to change the result of the election. This was the finding of numerous Republican-appointed judges and the Trump administration's own Department of Justice. Every state has now weighed in and chosen to certify its electoral slate based on the popular vote as set out in the Constitution. I understand that many Americans who would never storm this Capitol don't trust the integrity of the 2020 election. Don't think the states should have certified. Don't think we should have accepted the results from the states and are insisting on more transparency and accountability. In the 2016 elections, lest we forget, many Democrats objected to the results and distrusted the election. I challenge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to listen, but also to do our part to try to restore faith in our elections. Mr. President, we should all work to improve the integrity of the electoral system and the confidence of the American people in this bedrock of our great democratic republic. Today, I'll do my constitutional duty and oppose these efforts to reject the state-certified results And tomorrow, in the wake of this attack on the Capitol, the pandemic that engulfs us and other national challenges, let's work together for the people. Yield back.
Democratic leader.
Mr. President, I believe we have 8 minutes left, so I'd like to divide 4 to Senator King and 4 to Senator Van Hollen.
That's correct, leader.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Mr. President, Winston Churchill once said that he could do a 2-hour speech extemporaneously, but a 10-minute speech took immense preparation. I don't know what he would have said about a 4-minute speech. We are a 240-year anomaly in world history. We think that what we have here in this country is the way it's always been. It is a very unusual form of government. The normal form of government throughout world history is dictators, kings, czars, pharaohs, warlords, tyrants. And we thought 20 years ago the march of history was toward democracy, but it is in retreat in Hungary and Turkey. Goodness knows in Russia. Democracy as we have practiced it is fragile. It's fragile and it rests upon trust. It rests upon trust in facts. It rests upon trust in courts, in public officials, and yes, in elections. I don't sympathize or justify or in any way support, that's putting it mildly, what happened here today, but I understand it. I understand it because I saw those people interviewed today and they said, we're here because this election has been stolen. And the reason they said that is that their leader has been telling them that every day for 2 months. We cannot afford to pull bricks out from the foundation of trust that underlies our entire system. And I agree with Governor Romney that the answer to this problem is to tell people the truth, is to tell them what happened. It's easy to confront your opponents. It's hard to confront your friends. It's hard to tell your supporters something they don't want to hear. But that's our obligation. That's why the word leader is applied to people in jobs like ours. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be something that we take on as a sacred obligation. And if people believe something that isn't true, it's our obligation to tell them, no, I'm sorry, it isn't. Just as Senator Portman just said, as Mike Lee just said, I'm sorry, we can't do this here. We don't want to do this here. This is a power reserved to the states, not to the Congress. And I agree with the majority leader. I think this is one of the most important votes any of us will ever take. On December 1st, 1862, Abraham Lincoln came to this building. He came to this building in the darkest days of the Civil War. He was trying to awaken the Congress to the crisis that we were facing. And he didn't feel that they were fully and effectively engaged. And he ended his speech that day with words that I think have an eerie relevance tonight. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said. Fellow Americans, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. And here's his final words. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mob violence and attack we saw on our Capitol today should be a wake-up call to each and every one of us of what happens when we fail to come together, not as Democrats and Republicans, but each of us as Americans, to stand up to a president who time and again has shown contempt for our democracy, contempt for our Constitution. Today here on the Capitol, we witnessed people taking down an American flag and putting up a Trump flag. That is not democracy in the United States of America. As every senator who has spoken has mentioned, we have for hundreds of years had a peaceful transfer of power. Nobody likes to lose, and supporters of the losing candidate are always disappointed. What's different this time? We all know what's different this time. We had a president who, as a senator from New Jersey, said even before a vote was cast, that if he didn't win the election, it was going to be a fraud. And every day since then has perpetrated that lie. We have a president who just today criticized very loyal vice president who is presiding right now, urging him to disregard his responsibilities under the Constitution of the United States in order to reinstall Donald Trump as president. The same person who got on the phone to the Secretary of State in Georgia and threatened him to change the results of the election. Mr. President, I read something this week I'd never thought I'd read in a newspaper in the United States of America. It was an op-ed by all the living former secretaries of defense, including Secretaries Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Mattis, warning the country about our tradition of peaceful transfer of power and that it would be inappropriate for the military to take sides. In the United States of America, we talk to the world about how we want to promote democracy and our values, and right here at home, too many are undermining those values. And Mr. President, Donald Trump could not do this alone. He can only do it if he's aided and abetted by individuals who are willing to perpetrate those lies and those conspiracies. And that is why it is so important that we as Democrats and Republicans and senators stand up together. Stand up together and tell the truth. You know, when you go into a court of law like those 60 cases, you're testifying under penalty of perjury. That's very different than here in the House and the Senate. And in all those 60 cases under penalty of perjury, there was no evidence of widespread fraud. So it should be easy for us all together to tell the truth. On January 20th, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the next president of the United States. He has said he wants to bring the country together. He has said he wants to bring Democrats and Republicans together to do some of the pressing business of this country, to defeat this pandemic, to get the economy going again, to face challenging issues of racial and social justice. I hope we will learn from what happened today, the mob attack on this Capitol, the price we pay when we don't stand up for the truth and for democracy. James McHenry, Maryland's delegate to the Constitutional Convention, wrote about a famous exchange in his diaries between Elizabeth Willing Powell and Benjamin Franklin. wrote, a lady asked Dr. Franklin, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? A republic, replied Dr. Franklin, if you can keep it. My colleagues, this is a test of whether we're united to keep our republic. I hope we will pass the test together. Thank you.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield up to 5 minutes to the Senator from South Carolina, Senator Graham.
Senator from South Carolina.
Many times my state has been the problem. I love it. It's where I want to die, but no time soon. Tim and I have a good relationship. I love Tim Scott. 1876, South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida sent 2 slate of electors. They had 2 governments, by the way, and we didn't know what to do. Why did South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana do it? To hold the country hostage to end Reconstruction. It worked. The commission was 8-7. It didn't work. Nobody accepted it. The way it ended is when Hayes did a deal with these 3 states. You give me the electors, I'll kick the Union Army out. The rest is history. It led to Jim Crow. If you're looking for historical guidance, this is not the one to pick. If you're looking for a way to convince people there was no fraud, having a commission chosen by Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and John Roberts is not going to get you to where you want to go. It ain't going to work. So it's not going to do any good.
Just the guy I'm looking.
It's going to
Okay,
delay.
so 2 rounds
It gives
now in the
credibility
books.
to a dark chapter of our history. That's why I'm not with you.
We've been solid.
But I will fight to my death for you. You're able to object. You're not doing anything wrong. Other people have objected. I just think it's a uniquely bad idea.
Big win
to delay
tonight,
this
Junior.
election.
For sure.
Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey.
Everybody's doing their job, basically.
I hate it being this
Junior,
way. Oh my
how do you
God,
prepare
I
for
hate
your
it.
next opponent?
From my point of view, he's been a consequential president.
Just
But
go
today,
about our. Any more questions?
first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful. But when the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3 that they didn't violate the Constitution of Wisconsin, I agree with the 3, but I accept the 4. If Al Gore can accept 5-4, he's not president. I can accept Wisconsin 4-3. Pennsylvania, it went to the Second Circuit. So much for all the judges being in Trump's pocket. They said, no, you're wrong. I accept the Pennsylvania Second Circuit that Trump's lawsuit wasn't right. Georgia, they said the Secretary of State took the law in his own hands. He changed the election laws unlawfully. A federal judge said, no, I accept the federal judge even though I don't agree with it. Fraud. They said there's 66,000 people in Georgia under 18 voted. How many people believe that? I asked, give me 10. Hadn't had one. They said 8,000 felons in prison in Arizona voted. Give me 10. Hadn't gotten one. Does that say there's problems in every election? I don't buy this. Enough's enough. We got to end it. Vice President Pence, what they're asking you to do, you won't do because you can't. You talk about interesting times. I associate myself with Rand Paul. How many times will you hear that? The mob has done something nobody else could do to get me and Rand to agree. Rand is right. If you're a conservative, this is the most offensive concept in the world, that a single person could disenfranchise 155 million people. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and the House of Representatives, open all certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for president shall be president. Where in there does it say Mike can say, I don't like the results? I want to send them back to the states. I believe there was fraud. To the conservatives who believe in the Constitution, now's your chance to stand up and be counted. Originalism, count me in. It means what it says.
So, Mike, Mr. Vice President, just hang in there. They said we can count on Mike. All of us can count on the Vice President. You're going to do the right thing. You're going to do the constitutional thing. You got a son who flies F-35s. You got a son-in-law who flies F-18s. They're out there flying so that we can get it right here. There are people dying, my good friend from Illinois, to make sure we have a chance to argue among ourselves, and when it's over, it is over. It is over. The final thing, Joe Biden. I've traveled the world with Joe. I hoped he lost. I prayed he would lose. He won. He's the legitimate president of the United States. I cannot convince people, certain groups, by my words, but I will tell you by my actions, that maybe I, above all others in this body, need to say this. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are lawfully elected and will become the president and the vice president of the United States on January the 20th.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I yield back the balance of our time.
All time has expired. The question is, shall the objections submitted by the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, and the senator from Texas, Mr. Cruz, and others, be sustained?
Well, Kevin, I was able to catch up with the head coach for the Clippers. He said it's all about confidence for our guys, the belief in ourselves that we belong here.
Is there a second?
So he spoke about the importance of gaining the
There is.
momentum in this series.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Booker. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Braun. Mr. Brown. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kramer. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Haggerty. Ms. Harris. Ms. Hassan. Mr. Holy. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Hickenlooper. Ms. Hirono.
And then for the Clippers.
No.
Is checked in for Zubats.
Mr. Hoven.
Comes in for Marcus Morris. And it's Patrick Beverly in for
Mrs. Hyde-Smith.
and foul on the shot. So that's really your call right now.
Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Kane.
Go get him, Junior.
Mr. Kelly.
Lakers leading by 9, and the Clippers.
Mr. Kennedy.
Ivica Zubac is out there with the bucket. Then it's Luke Kennard.
Mr. King.
And there's Jackson, and it's Leonard in at the 3.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Zubac.
Mr. Langford.
Jackson looking around.
Mr. Leahy.
Now the pass to Leonard. Shoots over Matthews.
Mr. Lee.
Leonard, no luck.
Mrs. Leffler. Mr. Lujan. Ms. Lummis. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Markey. Mr. Marshall. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mr. Murphy. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Paul. Mr. Peters. Mr. Portman.
James will bring it up for the Los Angeles Lakers.
Mr. Reed.
Matthews deflects the pass, and that's
Mr.
enough.
Risch.
The Lakers will retain possession.
Mr. Romney.
Almost came up with a steal there.
Absolutely appreciate
Ms. Rosen.
the effort, though. He really went after it. So
Mr. Rounds.
Davis is checked in for the Lakers. Offensive rebound.
Mr. Rubio.
Good. 6 points for Mr. Incredible.
Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sass. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Scott of Florida. Mr. Scott of South Carolina.
Starting to take shape here. They're working it inside.
Mrs. Shaheen.
Shots from close range.
Mr. Shelby.
Finds Kennard.
Ms. Cinema.
Leonard against James. Leonard attacking. Up and
Ms.
in.
Smith.
First basket of the game for him. 1 for 4.
Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Tuberville. Mr. Van Hollen.
Well, you're working the two-man game with
Mr.
Kawhi
Warner.
as your primary target. That's the first guy you need to
Ms.
stop.
Warren.
Keeping us updated from the sideline. Let's swing it over to
Mr. Whitehouse.
Thanks, Kevin. Mr. Incredible in their last
Mr. Wicker.
My bad. My bad.
Mr. Wyden.
34 points and with his usual dominant
Mr.
self-on the
Young.
glass. He put up great numbers in a terrific effort. It's not a game that anyone wanted to miss. And they'll be looking for a repeat performance tonight, Kevin.
Thanks for the report, D.A. Great, phenomenal effort by him in that last game.
He willed the team to victory through his talent and through that competitiveness.
Let's give credit to his teammates for continuing to find this guy. They knew he had the hot hand, and they
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting, but we've just gotten a new tweet from the president, and this one is worth repeating. From the president, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Again, from the president, please support our Capitol Hill and law enforcement, Capitol Hill Police and law enforcement. They are on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. And it is noteworthy and will be a matter of historical record that 14 minutes prior to that tweet, as the protesters were breaching the security line as they are now and entering the closed-off Capitol, he tweeted, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving the states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent and inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. Back-to-back those claims, and by the way, the one I just read is flagged by Twitter. This claim about election fraud is disputed, Kayla.
Yeah, and perhaps some notable nuance right there, Shep, that the president is saying to support Capitol Police and law enforcement, even as he is trying to cast a pall over his own Vice President Mike Pence. And earlier today in that speech, he was taking direct aim and vowing vengeance on Republicans like Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House, saying we got to get rid of her because Cheney was one of many Republicans on the House side who was denouncing the efforts by Republicans to object to these results. So certainly he is saying that you should be deferential to law enforcement, but also not really throwing his support behind the Republicans who have been trying to go through the order of business of counting these votes, which is why we are here today and why we are covering the Capitol in such close fashion and why eyes all around the world are on the Capitol.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC.
Sorry for interrupting, but we've just gotten a new tweet from the president, and this one is worth repeating. From the president, please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. Again, from the president, please support our Capitol Hill and law enforcement, Capitol Hill Police and law enforcement.
Usually as proud a place as exists in America. It is where Franklin Roosevelt steadied a nation crippled by the Depression.
The only thing we have to state also told.
It is good that he has asked people to go home, but what has happened today is unprecedented in American history. And when you have violent mobs storming the floor of the House of Representatives and the floor of the United States Senate, and the president's response is to say that he loves those people, it is absolutely counter to the Constitution and counter to the peaceful transition of power and the values on which this republic was built. We have oaths that we have taken to the Constitution, and we got to uphold those oaths. And
and Congresswoman, I mean, even more than that, I mean, yes, I hear what you're saying, but is it going to get the job done? In other words, is he talking out of both sides of his mouth? He's saying, go home, but you were robbed. You have every right to be angry. This was a fraud. This was stolen. I mean, he's doing two things at once. And the goal here, I think, of the statement, I think what those of you in lockdown right now who would like to get about your business and go on with your day, there's one goal, which is get this thing under control and get the mob out of there.
Look, there's no question about that, Savannah. You know, we have very deep and clear political differences in this country, but we don't resolve those differences by mob violence. And it doesn't matter what side of those issues you stand on. The President of the United States statement now, in my view, was completely inadequate. What he has done and what he has caused here is something that we've never seen before in our history. It's been 245 years. And no president has ever failed to concede or agree to leave office after the Electoral College has voted. And I think what we are seeing today is a result of that, a result of convincing people that somehow Congress was going to overturn the results of this election, a result of suggesting that he wouldn't leave office. Those are very, very dangerous things. And he will be remembered. This will be part of his legacy, and it is a dangerous moment for the country.
Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, stay safe, keep us posted, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Savannah. Appreciate it.
4:30 on the East Coast here as we walk
the states.
Enforcement.
The phone with us right now is Republican. Are instant. We saw
Senate.
There's still
Hole is still. We have no indication.
Immensely
Scoring the key can. And essentially saying the same.
What is also striking here, Lester, is that he took such direct aim at other members of his own party, essentially calling them hypocrites without using that word, saying in so many words, you're relying on other people to keep the guardrails on. You're doing this as a kind of photo op while still trying to act like things are going to be okay because more responsible people will keep things from really going off the tracks. You got to look ahead, right, to what this means now after the inauguration. And we'll note that we're seeing, I believe, Senator Ted Cruz there speaking in the Senate. He is, of course, the senator who signed on to that objection being raised by the Arizona House Republican who lodged it. You have to look ahead to what happens after January 20th, Lester, and what this means for actual governing. What happens, right, if, in fact, the Georgia race holds, because that's the other huge story we're covering today. What happens in that Georgia race between Jon Ossoff and Republican Senator David Perdue? Can Jon Ossoff hold that lead and deliver the Senate to Democrats now? Can Democrats work across the aisle with the Republicans if they need to? And they might not, because a 50-50 tie, of course, would be broken by Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. But can Democrats potentially work across the aisle if there are Democratic defectors, given what they're seeing? I spoke with one Democratic senator this morning, Lester, who said, I'm going to find that very difficult to do, given the thing that is going down now on Capitol Hill, especially over the next 12 to 18 hours here, what we're going to see before tomorrow, depending how long this thing lasts. You also have to look at Republicans, and there are some Republicans like Senator McConnell. Listen, he seemed deeply emotional there. We don't often see that level of sort of visible, I don't want to call it angst, but maybe visible emotion from Senator McConnell. He was very clearly invested in what he was saying. Again, you can argue about the timing. You can discuss whether he should have done something like this sooner, but clearly he means what he says right now. And so how does that play out when you are still going to have in the Congress people like, Senator Cruz, people like who are going to be potentially signing on to these other objections that we may see? I spoke with another senator who told me that they believe this was just a Democratic senator, a photo op, basically, for potential 2024 candidates who want to continue to hold on to the president's supporters and the president's base. You also have to look more broadly at the governing piece of this, Lester. What happens if, of course, it is a Democratic Senate? What does it mean under a President-elect Biden? Under a President Biden, of course, once he is inaugurated on January 20th, there is a whole slew of policy issues that members of the Democratic Senate, if that is where this goes, will want to pass. Everything from almost immediate COVID relief. You heard Senator Chuck Schumer talk about that, talk about the idea of getting $2,000 stimulus checks to people who are struggling. You will likely see Democrats work to, for example, raise the minimum wage. That's another one of the priorities for President-elect Biden and his team. Moving judicial nominees through the system, something that would be potentially slowed down if Republicans manage to maintain control of the Senate. You've got the potential to strengthen Obamacare. You have a number of things legislatively that could happen. But the personality piece of this and the way that today will play out in the future, I think, is significant and shouldn't be ignored, Lester.
All right, Hallie Jackson, thanks very much. Let me bring in Kristen Welker, who's watching all this for us. Kristen, it shouldn't be lost to anyone that the vice president has essentially split from the president now on this question of whether these votes can be rejected. He basically says he's not going to do it. And then you have Mitch McConnell, we've been talking about, who basically said, sorry, pal, you're out of options. The impact of this, how is it being read at the White House right now?
Well, I think you lay out why today is so extraordinary, Lester, because here you have the two top Republicans essentially breaking with President Trump. You have his own vice president, despite the fact that the president has publicly and privately for days been pressuring Vice President Mike Pence to break with him and to somehow try to block the proceedings today, to send these electoral votes back to the states, saying bluntly in a letter as these proceedings were getting underway that he's not going to do that he does not have the authority to do that under the Constitution. And then you have those striking remarks by Leader Mitch McConnell, again reiterating what Casey said, saying that the country could go into a death spiral if we allow it to continue to question the results of elections in the way that is happening right now. And so that's the backdrop. What's the thinking here behind the scenes at the White House? I can tell you that in speaking to a number of current and former officials, they are essentially viewing today as the president's last stand, and they're hoping that they can make him see that. They privately acknowledge that this is over, that at the end of these proceedings, Vice President Mike Pence is going to read Joe Biden's name as the next president, for the first time, by the way, acknowledging that. And they're trying to get the president to view today in the same way. The question is, Lester, will he? Will he listen? They're not anticipating that he is going to anytime soon abandon his talking points that there was widespread fraud. But they have been trying to make the case to him privately behind the scenes that, look, this is over. And what we heard in those remarks that he was making before thousands of supporters here in Washington, D.C. earlier today was essentially an airing of his grievances, Lester, lashing out in various different directions and again reiterating those baseless claims of voter fraud. And now here we have the Senate Majority Leader saying that they are baseless, saying that the voters have spoken, the states have spoken, and that the courts have spoken as well, and really laying out where we are right now in stark terms. I think you asked the right question. What happens next? What is the fallout within the GOP? I can tell you that a number of top Republicans are pointing the finger squarely at President Trump for the stunning upset that we saw overnight in Georgia, the fact that another race might go to the Democrats, and that the Democrats will likely have control of the Senate. They say that is on President Trump's shoulders. So what happens next? We are going to witness a party that's going to wrestle with these deep divides, Lester.
Yeah, and we are seeing that protests continue to play out on the streets of Washington. Supporters of the president who believe what he is saying about his chances to hold on to the presidency. Ellison Barber is with some of those protesters on the ground in Washington. I'm curious, Ellison, how much this crowd knows about some of the events of the last hour or so.
Lester, I just want to show you what's happening right now. It looks like to us the protesters have been able to take the bicycle barricades down here, and they're making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol right now. When this happened a minute ago, it's not entirely clear how or why they've been able to get past this area, but all morning there have been bicycle racks keeping protesters back. At some point, it seems those became open. Somehow, either the protesters here pushed through it or someone moved them back. They are now making their way up the steps of the U.S. Capitol. You can see Capitol Police there holding the crowds back. People started cheering, saying, "Let's go, let's go." I spoke to one person earlier asking if they had seen the letter that the vice president sent over. When I showed it to them, they were shocked. They said if that was from Pence, they didn't quite believe me when I read it to them, that they were disappointed. But right now it seems like we have seen the protesters who have been here all morning actually breach the bicycle barricades. You can see what they look like. It's these right here, and make their way up to the steps of the U.S. Capitol here. And for now, it seems like police are holding them back to some degree, but this is the furthest we have ever seen any protesters make their way up towards anything. And when they started moving, there were loud cheers from the crowd here. And for now, it seems like police have them stopped on the steps there, but they have broken through the bicycle barricades, the bicycle racks that were here, and have made their way up the steps of the United States Capitol. Lester?
Yeah, I can't recall, and maybe it's happened, but I certainly can't recall protests that have reached that far up to the Capitol, to the steps. But again, as you point out, it appears Capitol Police have it under control. We'll continue to check back with you, Ellison. I want to bring in Michael Beschloss, the NBC News presidential historian, for a moment. Michael, as we were talking a moment ago, the president is losing many of his key supporters, even his vice. Oh, apparently, we lost Michael Beschloss. I apologize. Let me bring back Kristen Welker. Kristen, following up on the point we were talking about, it was several months ago the issue was raised of, gee, would the president leave peacefully? Will there be a peaceful handover of power? And that question seems it has to loom large again as we watch these objections take place in the Capitol. Key allies, the president now turning against him, people marching on the streets up to the foot of the Capitol. It's hard not to take a step back and wonder where we are.
Well, there's no doubt that the president's baseless accusations of widespread fraud have risked a peaceful transfer of power. And as you point out, Lester, these scenes that are unfolding in the streets of D.C., these protesters who are trying to break into the Capitol, it's really just extraordinary footage. There is a big question mark about what the president's exit will look like. We have been talking to officials here behind the scenes, and even they don't know the answer to that, Lester. We know that there was some discussion about him potentially announcing a run in 2024 on the day of President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. I am being told that there are mounting calls from some of his closest advisors for him to wait, for him to hold off. In part, they say, because he would create an unnecessary split screen. He wouldn't have the momentum that he would want to have heading into a new election cycle, and to potentially even wait until after the next midterm elections in 2022. So those question marks, though, really adding to the unease and concerns about whether there will be a peaceful transfer of power. And look, in speaking to Biden transition officials, they say that the Trump administration has not been as forthcoming as they would like with information as they embark upon this historic transition in which they are going to be taking over the COVID pandemic, the economy in crisis. And so those are really underscoring the key concerns about how this transition will be carried out as the president continues these baseless claims and continues to spin up and energize his supporters in this way. Lester.
All right, Kristen, thanks. Let me bring in Pete Williams, our justice correspondent. Pete, so these objections could take this process late into the night. As you noted, the conclusion is a foregone one that Joe Biden will take the oath of office on the 20th. Is there anything between now and the 20th that they could use to try and continue to derail things?
No, I think the simple answer to that is no. There are still some lawsuits out there pending, believe it or not, but it's just too late. It's too late to challenge the process. It was really very late after the electoral vote in December. Once the Congress certifies the vote, counts the vote, it's really game over. Now, you were talking about the future. There are a lot of questions about how this election was conducted in the midst of a pandemic that undoubtedly are going to lead to discussions in states all around the country about how possibly to change procedures. How to distribute mail-in ballots, what kind of documentation has to come with them. Can state officials make changes like that without permission from the state legislature? All of that. At the same time, I know from talking to election scholars that there's going to be a real interest in trying to get Congress to change the law. To change the law that we've looked through this whole process about how you count electoral votes. So I think there'll be real momentum for that. And one other thing I would say, Lester, is, as we try to figure out, well, it looks now like the Capitol, the police are
Pete, let me break away from you a second, because things are happening very quickly there on appears to be the east side of the Capitol. People now have moved past the police and into the building. Ellis and Barbara, what can you tell us?
Hey, Lester, yeah, you can see what's happening right in front of us. We saw Capitol Police trying to push people back, hold them back, and arrest them. They did seem to be arresting some, but they no longer have been able to keep them back. You can see some Capitol Police officers and protesters up there waving for more. If you look just right next to me, there is a massive amount of what appears to be blood on the ground here. At least one person over here is being injured and taken away on a stretcher right now. As more and more people make their way towards the step and push through, as I was watching this, saying it looks like people are being arrested. One woman came up to me and she said that this is what happens when they believe that there have been what they believe are fraud in the election, and told me these are people standing up for America. But you can see a lot of people packed on the steps now. They have pushed back the barricade, the physical barricade that was initially down here, the bicycle racks, then the barricade of Capitol Police officers standing on the steps, holding them back, and they have made their way all the way up the U.S. Capitol steps. We have seen people be detained, seemingly arrested, put in handcuffs, and we have seen at least one person who appears to have fairly serious injuries enough to be taken away, and blood left here on the ground where people have pushed past this barricade. You can hear them getting louder, cheering as more people make their way to this area. Some sort of loud explosion type bang noise right now as some people are starting to move. It's hard to see what is happening beyond what's right in this area, but Capitol Police have gone to the other steps to try to keep those secure, but it seems like they've lost the majority of the control of these steps down here in the middle as more and more protesters make their way towards this area. They are coming from both sides of the Capitol at this point, filling in this area here. Lester?
Yeah, this is a disturbing scene, to say the least. It appeared that police essentially retreated and closed the doors. They're preventing anyone else from entering, but we did see what appeared to be protesters entering the building. This following a day of largely peaceful protests in Washington of the president's supporters. The president addressed those supporters a couple of hours ago and continued to claim many of the bogus claims that he's made about the legitimacy of the election. But clearly, these are folks who believe him and who are now taking the extraordinary step of now setting siege to at least part of the Capitol. Casey Hunt, you were, if I believe, right across the street from this in one of the Senate office buildings. We know some of the office buildings were evacuated. Is this all related?
It seems so, Lester. We're still trying to determine exactly what the cause was to have people actually relocate from the Cannon complex. I think evacuation may be the wrong word to explain what we now know happened in the Cannon office building. They've gathered staff inside the complex. The calculation seems to be that it is safer to remain inside the complex than to send people out into what everyone is looking at right now on the screen. But again, we have not gotten any reports or indications of anything inside one of the buildings that at this point would cause us to be alarmed about that. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on this. Now, this scene that we're watching here, so this is the the east front of the Capitol. That door, some of the viewers may recognize if you've ever watched a state funeral, when John McCain's casket or George H.W. Bush's casket recently came, was at the U.S. Capitol building. It comes out that door. It's carried down those steps. It's an extraordinarily, it's a ceremonial door. So far as we can see, there's no indication that it has been breached. And I would say that it would be an unbelievably significant thing for something like that to happen. So, I want to set that aside for a second because just the scene of all these people here is also remarkable. This is an area that is always controlled by the Capitol Police. In fact, in recent months, it's been hard to, if you're a member of a general public, even walk along the driveway that's in front of the Capitol steps. You have to have a Capitol ID. I mean, this is where, I've walked to work through one of the doors on the side of this building every day for the last 10 or 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Again, it's an area that, members of Congress will pull up in their cars to go in and out of the buildings on the Senate and the House side. These steps are right in the middle of the building, so that's the dome, the rotunda. It's the middle of the Capitol. On one side is the Senate chamber, the other side, the House of Representatives. Of course, our entire government now gathered here in this building, the Senate debating on one side, the House debating on the other, to try and deal with these objections to the counting of the Electoral College. And I think it's important to underscore, Lester, that the President of the United States has encouraged people to do this. They are here at his urging. He held a rally at the Ellipse just down the street. And there are, of course, Republican members of the House and the Senate who are saying that this election should be overturned, that there should be and are doubts about the validity of it. And that is part of why, or largely why, all of these people have come to Washington and are engaged in a spectacle that I don't think we've seen in modern times, and certainly one that is nerve-wracking for those who typically find security inside this building. So a truly remarkable split-screen moment, Lester.
I certainly feel the loss of words to describe what we're seeing and how this will resonate. I want to note that Kevin McCarthy, House GOP leader, has asked for protesters to remain peaceful, writing on Twitter, "Thank you to Capitol Police for protecting the people's house. Protesters have a constitutionally protected right to be heard, but I urge them to remain peaceful." And we should note the crowd has, again, essentially forced the police officers there on the east front of the Capitol inside, as people now have taken a position to wave the flags and continue the rally. I want to bring Pete Williams back in. Pete, we know the mayor in Washington, D.C. had activated the National Guard in the event of any violence. This is federal property here. This is the Capitol. Would they have any role, any possible role in if things were to get out of hand here?
Oh, sure. There's U.S. Capitol Police have the ultimate jurisdiction on the Capitol grounds, but they could call in that help as well. Those doors on the east front of the Capitol, known as the Columbus doors, are bronze doors. They're immensely huge, heavy doors. So once they close the doors, there's no way anybody's going to get into the building. But having them on the steps there is certainly not what the police had in mind. We understood earlier that a portion of the Library of Congress, which is, if you were standing up there where all those people are, you looked out toward where we are, toward the camera, and across the street, you'd be looking at the Library of Congress. We believe part of that has been evacuated now. It wasn't open to the public anyway, but staffers inside were asked to leave, and also parts of the House Office building, which would be to your left across Independence Avenue if you were standing there in the plaza. And we have been told by a couple of law enforcement officials that it was a suspicious package. Now, you know, suspicious packages, frankly, we see those almost every week here in Washington, but obviously under the current circumstances, there's a little more concern because of it. But I think it's fair to say that the protesters are not going to be able to get inside the Capitol building.
And we do know that there are underground passageways for members of Congress to safely make their way out of the Capitol, even as this is going on. Ellison Barber is on the scene there outside the east front of the Capitol. Ellison, is this crowd being fed? We know people are leaving the rally. Are there people, is this growing, I guess is my question.
Hey, Lester. Yeah, sorry, we're kind of making our way a little as safely as we can closer to try and get the best vantage point and see as much as we can. To answer your question, yes, particularly coming over from this side here, you can see it's slowed a little bit, but people are still coming to this area. Initially, right after they broke through the barricades and made their way up towards the stairs, it seemed like anybody that was kind of near the area. We've seen a lot of different small groups of protesters around the Capitol all morning. It seemed like anybody who was nearby made their way here as quickly as they could. I mean, people hurrying along the sides here. More people are still coming and making their way towards this area, though in some ways, and this has really only been in the last 15 minutes or so, it does feel a little bit calmer here than it did initially when those barricades first went down and as they inched their way up the stairs. The people who are here, they've kind of stayed put, but we are seeing a slow trickle of other people still coming in here. Chants, we've heard chants of USA, USA. For now, it seems like there might be some sort of, I don't know if controlled chaos is the right word, but it's the only one I can think of at this moment, where you have a little bit less people sprinting in. Capitol Police seem to have fairly good control of the other side steps and haven't let people up those. But this area, this group here, most of them have been here all morning. The group has grown throughout the day. We've seen after they breached the barricade, more people coming towards this area. And it seems like, Lester, they have no plans of leaving anytime soon.
All right, Ellison, keep us posted. And let me go back to Casey Hunt. As we watch the Senate and House now continue to debate the Republican objections to the results in Arizona, the first of what we believe will be several states that will be challenged in a process that will certainly be elongated because of these Republican challenges. Casey, are the senators and House members aware of what's going on outside the building?
So yes, it's hard not to be, and you're seeing both chambers. Our viewers can see on the sides of the screens the dais for each, and you just saw some men in suits running in the well of the House of Representatives. Things seem to be a little bit calmer at this moment, but that's a pretty unusual thing to see. And you'll also note that Mike Pence, who is currently acting in his role as president of the Senate, or was, no longer appears to be in the Senate chamber. Now, we are working on reporting out why it was that he might have been moved. We knew that it would be possible that he might leave the chamber for reasons unrelated to the security outside, but we we also are learning at this point, we're getting alerts from the U.S. Capitol Police that all buildings within the Capitol complex are essentially being locked down from the perspective of, they say there's an external security threat is how they're framing it. No entry or exit is permitted, and they're urging people inside this complex to stay away from exterior windows or doors. Again, they seem to be urging people to stay inside at the complex, saying that they will not let people out, of course, because they do seem, and we can see on our screen here, that there has been some control lost of areas that typically are under control of the Capitol Police, and that clearly is something, I mean, they certainly will lock down the Capitol over less than what we're seeing unfold outside right now. I mean, we should remind people, I mean, it's obviously the center of our government, and there have been many times when I have been told I can't leave the Capitol because they're concerned about a suspicious package or some other issue. Almost always those issues are resolved without there being any sort of incident, or they find that the threat, in fact, did not materialize. Now, there have been a couple instances where things have turned out to be real. There was an incident with the Capitol Police in a shooting a few years ago. But again, we've never seen anything like this, where there has been a group of protesters, at least certainly not in my recent memory. And you'll also notice, I think one of those boxes may have just gone black. And I may ask the control room, it's possible the feed was shut off, but it could also be technical on our end. So that, again, may be another indication that things are adjusting. Okay, the feed went down, I'm told, so apologies for that. So at this point, we're not necessarily seeing anyone inside the Capitol act with extraordinary alarm, and again, we have no indication that anyone has gotten inside the building, but it clearly is a pretty extraordinary moment here at the U.S. Capitol, Lester.
Yeah, we're told the House now gaveled to recess as we watch this crowd go larger. There have been no, at least as far as our cameras can see, no apparent acts of violence, but certainly the crowd has moved past where police wanted them to do. We saw a larger police presence now on one of the set of steps now, creating a kind of a human chain to protect anyone from trying to enter or storm the building. But this is what it is. Many of these people had come from a rally outside the White House where President Trump greeted them and spoke to them. Kristen Welker, our White House correspondent. Kristen, one would think, one would hope maybe is a better question, that the White House would urge some calm, that something like this does not get further out of control. Have we heard anything from the White House?
We haven't heard from the White House, Lester, but let me read you what I just got from a former White House official who sent this to me. The president needs to come out immediately, in all caps, and call on protesters to stand down and protest peacefully. He's the only person who can sway this crowd. So here you have some of his own former officials, some of his top allies, Lester, saying that ultimately it is up to President Trump to come out and stand this crowd down. Now, he could do that on Twitter. He could do that by making a statement. The question is, will he do that? Because, of course, earlier today, as you point out, he spoke to this crowd, these throngs of supporters, and essentially reiterated some of his false claims of voter fraud that have now been knocked down by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. And it comes amid this break with Mitch McConnell, who has said that we cannot continuously relitigate elections, that the country would go into a death spiral if it went down that path. We now have this extraordinary break with Vice President Mike Pence, who has made it plain that he is going to follow the Constitution, which says that he does not have the unilateral authority to overturn the results of this election, that his role throughout these proceedings today is to effectively read the vote count once it comes in, once it is finished. And so there you have the basis for this and really what's underscoring what we are seeing unfold at the Capitol right now. So again, we continue to reach out to see if we are going to hear from President Trump, if he will get that message out to his supporters. But undoubtedly, he is going to get pressure from some within his own party to take action as we watch all of this unfold, Lester.
Yeah, many of the kinds of scenes that we have seen in foreign places that would give us a chill, and perhaps leaving a chill certainly as we watch it take place outside our own Capitol right now. And we understand that both houses of Congress have now adjourned. Casey Hunt, what can you tell us about that?
Well, Lester, I can tell you that things here are escalating pretty quickly. The Capitol Police made an announcement in the well of the House that they were locking down both chambers, the Senate chamber and the House chamber. And when we saw the feed go dark a moment ago, I mean, typically they control whether we can see the House. So when they go into recess, that's often when we lose that feed. It shouldn't be an indication of any violence or problem necessarily, but that is exactly now what you're seeing them sending us. That on the technical side is because the chambers have recessed. So that's what you're seeing on your screen now instead of what's actually going on the floor of both of these chambers. But we're getting reports, Lester, and I should underscore, I'm in the Russell office building, which has been also locked down. We're not allowed to enter or exit the Russell House office building. The tunnels to the Capitol are closed. Many reporters who are inside the Capitol are posting pictures on social media that we're working on verifying, but we have multiple reports of protesters inside the Capitol. So that's something that we're working on finding with our own NBC eyes, but it's clear that there are at least a number of others who are in the complex who are seeing such things. There also has been another report from a reporter that I have worked with for a long time who works for a different news organization of people who are apparently breaking glass on doors. We want to underscore that's, again, something that we want to see with our own eyes to explain to viewers. But I would say that this situation is rapidly becoming more tense, and it's clear that the Capitol Police have had to step in and take a role that I don't think that they expected that they would need to be playing today. So again, we're going to continue to try and call members that are at the Capitol. We have producers who are inside the Capitol building as we try to report out in a careful way what exactly is happening here, Lester.
And Casey, just to keep us back on track, the objections would lead to 2 hours of debate for each state, so they would have still been discussing Arizona. Is that correct?
That's right, Lester. So what we were seeing happen in both chambers was the debate of that first objection to the Electoral College count. And there's no expectation, and Pete Williams has done a very good job of laying out what the law says about how this process plays out. The idea is that it would be continuous. And again, we haven't seen it very many times, or any version of it very many times in American history. But the idea would have been that those 2 hours of debate would have been continuous, and then you would have seen a vote happen on the floor of each chamber before each chamber then went back to the House of Representatives to resume the joint session to keep counting those votes. So we can at the very least say that protesters have interrupted the counting, the ratification of Joe Biden as president of the United States here. That process is currently on hold because there is concern about the safety of members of Congress as they try to go about carrying out that responsibility. We only got as far as the opening speeches in the Senate, and we were talking earlier about Mitch McConnell and his remarkable statement that our democracy would be in a death spiral if we were to overturn the election based on unproven accusations of fraud. And of course, his critics saying that was far too little too late because, of course, you have seen so many supporters of President Trump believe the misinformation that he has put out there about this election. And now we are seeing them take physical acts. I know Ellison Barber is out on the ground and has been keeping an eye out for any reports of possible violence in these protests. And again, we have not, or I have not witnessed any violence yet here inside the Capitol. So we do want to underscore that. But I think that note from Kevin McCarthy that you mentioned earlier, that even Republicans, supporters of President Trump, are having to say, okay, let's make sure, yes, you have the right to protest, but obviously you do not have the right to be violent here. So everything very much on edge here at this hour, Lester.
And we should know this happening as the president losing support of essentially the two top, besides himself, the two top Republicans. The Vice President, Mike Pence, putting out a statement before today's joint session, essentially rejecting the idea that he has any power to somehow overturn the results of the election, basically saying I'm going to follow the Constitution. I can't do it. And then we've been referring, of course, to Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, who made what appeared to be a very uncomfortable, emotional speech, basically saying this election, wasn't even close, that the president has exhausted his legal options, and basically imploring his fellow senators not to support this idea of challenging these electoral votes. This, again, a formal process that plays out every 4 years. It normally takes a half hour or so, but given the structure of the objections and now these protests, we don't know how long that process will take, even though we are assured of the outcome that at the end of the day and on January 20th, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the next president of the United States. But this, again, a crowd that has flowed down from the protests outside the White House today, buoyed on by the president himself, who made a series of untrue cases about the state of the election and his viability to continue his term. We have had some reports of things happening in this side of the crowd. Let me get to Ellison Barber, who can perhaps map out where we are. Ellison, have you seen or heard any reports of violence in this crowd?
So we did see someone being taken away on a stretcher and a fair amount of blood over one of the areas near where they breached the bicycle barricade, but we're not entirely sure what or how that happened, if someone tripped as they were breaking through or what may have occurred. We have not seen any violence in this area right now, but we have seen a very vocal crowd, obviously forceful crowd, make their way up to where they are now, and it does seem to be growing even further, Lester. Over here on the steps on the House side of the Capitol building, protesters have now made their way all the way up to the top of those. On the steps on the Senate side, there is a line of Capitol Police officers with the plastic shields you see in so many riots, standing side by side to keep protesters from going up those steps further. Earlier today, when Vice President Mike Pence arrived on the Hill, protesters here were shouting at him, one woman yelling through a bullhorn, telling him, "You were on the ticket to do something about it." When I stopped some people and asked them what they thought of that letter that the Vice President sent to Congress, saying that he did not feel he had any unilateral authority to strike down any of the electoral college votes, that his role was ceremonial as they count the votes here today. One protester I spoke to said that he was weak, he was spineless. The only person they feel like they can trust is President Trump. And as you look at this crowd, you have to think soon they will probably see that tweet that the president just sent out, and that could potentially make this situation more severe, escalate to some degree. This crowd is growing, though, and we have seen them grow. We have seen it grow kind of slowly in the last 5 minutes or so since the initial breach, but they are holding that step there. They have expanded to the other steps over here on the House side, and for now it seems like on the Senate side, Lester, Capitol Police have gotten that blocked off halfway up where they can't go further beyond that. Some music playing right now. We heard chants of USA, USA earlier, and something along the lines of "Whose house, our house." Lester.
Ellison, thank you very much. Continue to stay safe out there. We'll go back to you as events warrant. I want to go to Frank Thorpe. He's an NBC News producer. I believe he's joining us on the telephone from inside the Capitol. Frank, what can you tell us? What are you seeing and hearing inside?
I can just tell you that we're completely locked down here in the Capitol. We're not allowed to leave our offices. As you see on camera, the protesters have breached the Capitol. Those protesters that you see on TV are very, very close to the House chamber. And they've also been very close to the Senate chamber. We have senators and their aides who are locked down on the Senate floor. They're there to be protected, basically. It's about as secure as a room as you can get in the Capitol. But I have to say, it's incredibly tense here in the Capitol right now. Aides have been worried about this. I've been getting texts from aides for weeks now, just saying, wow, we're a little bit worried about what's going to happen on the 6th. This is something that people had worried could happen, and it's happening. And this is a situation also where you have to understand there's two things about how extraordinary this is at this moment in time. Members of the public have not been allowed in the Capitol for the last 9 or 10 months because of the pandemic. This has been completely shut down. Not to mention that this breach means that every single one of these protesters has not been screened. I mean, this is an unprecedented security breach in the Capitol, at least in my experience. where you have so many people here who have not been screened by Capitol Police. Every single time you go into the Capitol, you go through a magnetometer, your bags are checked, and police do a sweep of what you bring into the Capitol. Every single one of these protesters is here and hasn't been screened by Capitol Police. So I have to say, I mean, you know, aides and lawmakers are messaging us, trying to figure out what's happening. But as you can see, both the Senate and the House are on lockdown until this is resolved.
Yeah, it is incredibly disturbing. We've seen, we're watching right now is a number of apparent protesters now seem to be peacefully or voluntarily or somehow being led out of the Capitol right now. They seem to be heading toward. Well, maybe not.
So
is that the exit? If you look at the picture.
That camera, the shot that we have that you see right now is of them walking towards the House chamber. That's not the exit. That is
toward the House.
They're walking towards the House chamber right now, and that camera. So those they're not going anywhere. They're going directly to where the debate is going in the House chamber.
Yeah, Casey Hunt, give us your sense of what we're seeing here and what's happening inside.
So, Lester, our NBC News producer, Haley Talbot, is actually inside the House chamber right now. She's serving as a producer for many of us because, of course, we have been taking these coronavirus precautions. She has been letting us know from inside the chamber what's going on. They have been yelling to members of the House to stay seated, warning them that they may need to get underneath their seats. They have been saying that people may need to relocate to the cloakroom. Now, the cloakrooms are rooms for individual. Each party has one. It's a private gathering place for members of Congress. They're both off the House floor. But as you were just talking about with Frank, you see those protesters packed in there. The cloakrooms are actually in between the House floor and where those protesters are. So the benefit perhaps of the cloakroom would be that it is a closed off area. Remember, the House chamber is a big wide open space. There are public galleries around the edges on the third floor of the Capitol. The chamber itself is on the second floor. That's the button that you push in the elevator if you want to go to the chamber is 2. Up on 3, there are these galleries that the public and the press typically can go and sit. You may see that during State of the Union speeches, for example, or something along those lines. There are also members apparently yelling. There's a lot of chaos, Haley reports, from the chamber on the House floor. And this, again, I mean, I think we need to just step back and take a second here, Lester, to underscore how rare, unusual, and troubling what is going on here is. This is not something that has happened very frequently. It's not unprecedented that there has been a breach of the House chamber, but it was many, many years ago. I'm going to have to go and do my research into, there was a shooting that occurred many years ago. Puerto Rican activists shot down at the floor. If you pull out the drawer in one of the desks that sits on the House floor, I've actually seen it. The bullet hole is still there from that incident. But of course, the idea then was that they learned a lot from that incident and that things like that were never supposed to happen again. So the rarity of someone actually getting into the House chamber and doing something like this really cannot be overstated. And again, these protesters right now, from what we can see on our cameras, are outside the House chamber, outside the doors. Now, the question is whether they'll get into those doors. And again, I'm looking at these texts from Haley Talbot, our producer, who is on the scene there and who is in the room watching all of this unfold. Lester.
All right, Casey, thank you. We're also getting a note here. Washington, D.C. Mayor Bowser has ordered a citywide curfew beginning at 6 p.m. today. We are seeing Ellison Barber. I don't know if you're with us. We are seeing what appears to be some sort of chemical agent or smoke. Yeah, Ellison, we're looking at a picture, I think, from the other side of where you are, the west side. But are you hearing anything that suggests tear gas is being used?
So we haven't in the last 10 minutes or so, but earlier we did hear at least 2 loud bangs that we believe were concussion grenades of some kind up near the steps. No tear gas on this side as far as we can tell, but you can see, I'll just let you, if we walk a little some this way to show you a little more of the crowd here and see if we can see anything. We haven't heard anything or seen anything over here that would indicate that tear gas is being used on this side of the Capitol, but we did hear a couple loud bangs earlier that we believe were some sort of concussion grenade or something similar up in this middle area near those doors up at the front, probably trying to move or get protesters to leave or move back, or some. Obviously, they have not left their area, but on this side of the Capitol so far, Lester, we haven't seen anything so far that looks like any type of chemical agent or tear gas or anything of that nature.
Yeah, we were looking. It was the other side, and it was a waft of vapor or smoke. We'll try to. I don't want to say definitively. Obviously, that was tear gas, but we saw something in this image here a few moments ago. What appeared to be smoke wafting near the front of where that crowd is. We need to get to Pete Williams right now. Pete, you have some information about the whereabouts of the vice president right now.
Right. So I've talked to a member of the U.S. Senate who was on the Senate floor who told me a few moments ago that both the vice president and Charles Grassley, the president pro tem, were taken out of the Senate chamber to a secure location. The sergeant at arms took over the Senate chamber, told all the senators to stay away from the doors and that the doors had been locked. Just a few moments ago, however, this senator told me that they're now being moved out of the Senate chamber. The United States Senate is being evacuated. Members of the Senate are being led to a secure location. So they'll be taken probably out of the Capitol building by, I would assume, underground tunnels. I can tell you, having worked up there as a Capitol Hill aide on both the House and Senate sides, that there's tunnels all over the place that lead to all the various office buildings on the Hill. So it's possible to evacuate the Senate without taking them outside, and that's what's being done now. So this protest has now evacuated the United States Senate.
All right, Pete Williams, thanks very much. And again, much of this crowd fired up by the president himself a bit earlier as he spoke to that rally outside the White House. The president is now tweeting, not about specifically what you're seeing. He's tweeting about Vice President Pence, who announced today that he would follow the Constitution, the law, and not do anything that would attempt to try and overturn the results of the election, something that is beyond his power. The president tweeting, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a correct set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. So the president holding fast to the fantasy that the vote was an illegitimate one, and this coming as these pictures no doubt being seen in the White House and around the world of our Capitol under siege. The crowd does not appear to be violent, although there have been some individual reports, but they have certainly not only breached the outer perimeter but some the inside. That's where Frank Thorpe continues to. He's one of our producers on lockdown right now. Frank, what more can you add about those folks who we saw inside the Capitol?
So we've still been locked down in our gallery, in our office here in the Capitol. So I haven't actually seen any protesters because we're not even allowed to leave our space. But I can tell you that there's a lot of members of the press here and staff who are concerned and worried about even how to get out of the Capitol if they wanted to. They're trying to get out. They're trying to leave. And there's really not even a way to do that because Capitol Police has told us to stay out of the hallway, stay away from the windows, and avoid the protesters at all costs. There are still aides who are saying that they're on lockdown here in the Capitol, and we understand there still also might be senators on the floor, but there's also, discussions here and talk of trying to get gas masks distributed to those who are here in the Capitol in case that there's tear gas that's deployed within the Capitol. So, I mean, to be honest, we're trying to find out where those are. Right now, it's a question of how long this is going to last. We have gotten close to no guidance from Capitol Police other than just to stay where we are. But as I said, I mean, the Senate and the House still remains in recess, and I think both aides are texting us. And lawmakers are trying to figure out what's going on. This is still a very tense situation in the Capitol.
It's a 6 p.m. curfew.
All right, Frank Thorpe, continue to stay safe as the Capitol is on lockdown, an image that will certainly make a lot of people shudder, this scene right now of protesters who have laid siege to the U.S. Capitol, disrupting the process of the formal vote count of the electoral votes. As Pete Williams explained earlier, one of the, if not the oldest acts of our government, one of the oldest rituals of our government, but suspended right now as lawmakers have been locked down, or in some cases ushered away from the Capitol as this situation is dealt with. I understand we got another tweet from the president. Unfortunately, I don't have it in front of me, and bear with me 1 second to see if I can pull it up. Oh, here it is on the screen. President Trump moments ago tweeting, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the sides of our country. Stay peaceful." Interesting wording, support our Capitol Police. But that's the first acknowledgement of some of what we're seeing right now at the Capitol. Just to bring you back up to date, if you're coming into all this late, today, as dictated by the Constitution, a joint session of Congress to essentially go through the formal ritual of counting the electoral votes, brought out in a fine mahogany case, a process that normally takes a half hour every 4 years, but one that we knew was going to take longer this year. Many Republicans announcing they would stand up and object to the results in what amounted to the battleground states in the election, the states that Joe Biden won. This on the same day the president was promoting the idea of this rally of his supporters, which took place outside the White House. The president speaking. And as we expected, within that joint session, Republicans did, in fact, begin to object. First state in line, Arizona, which Joe Biden won narrowly, leading to up to 2 hours of debate and then 2 hours for each subsequent state. So a process we knew would go late into the night, perhaps the wee hours of the morning. But all that now on hold as we have watched this situation develop outside the Capitol. This is the view from the east front. We've seen other pictures from the other side of similar crowds. Some managed to get inside the Capitol as police began to retreat. The doors were still open. A number of people made their way in and have apparently reached as far into a cloakroom outside the House chambers. And they continue to chant right now. So that's where we're at. I'll check in one more time with Ellison Barber, who's keeping an eye on this crowd. Do things appear to be in hand, or police taking any control there?
Further than that barricade.
Hey, Lester, yeah, it seems like some of the people that were on the steps have started to disperse. We had people coming by telling other people that on the other side of the Capitol, that's where people are now going, trying to climb over, possibly some sort of scaffolding. So it seems like some people are now moving around to try and see kind of the other areas where protesters are. This area, though, for the last 10, 12 minutes or so since we last talked, it's kind of stayed the same. People here not giving up much ground on those steps in front of us. But some people now who aren't on the steps, they are moving about and moving to the other side of the Capitol as well. We haven't seen any sort of violent clashes on this side of the Capitol, and we haven't seen police deploy anything like tear gas or any sort of chemical agent. The Capitol Police on the steps. On the Senate side of the House, they have been able to keep protesters from going further up those stairs. But on the other steps, the steps in the middle, you can smell something now. Do you smell? I'm not entirely sure what that is, if that's smoke or something. There's something that we're starting to smell out here. It smells like something might be burning, but I'm not entirely sure what that is or where it is coming from. But yeah, this group right here, they're staying put, holding the areas that they have gained, if you will, and they're chanting now. I'm trying to listen to hear exactly what they're saying. It starts kind of up at the top and then makes its way down here. But there is something smells like it's burning from where, I'm not entirely sure, but you can smell smoke now, and It's unclear where that is coming from. But yeah, Lester, this group's still here. People have started to move to the other side of the Capitol, though, who are on this side. As some people came through and told us that where it's happening, people are on the other side of the Capitol. So they were moving sort of to, I guess, meet up with and possibly help that group with whatever was going on that side. This group staying put. And now it smells like we have something burning in the area near here. Lester?
All right, we'll let you narrow that down and where that may be occurring. Ellison Barber, thanks very much. And again, we saw pictures of people from inside the Capitol, protesters who made their way in as police began their retreat. And as was pointed out by our Frank Thorpe, these are individuals who have gone in unscreened, something that obviously doesn't happen in government buildings, certainly not the Capitol of the United States. This is moments ago. You can see some of the protesters. And now, to my understanding, as they walk in that area, that's the direction of the House chambers themselves. Casey Hunt has a little more color as to what's happening there. Casey?
That's right, Lester. A very tense scene right now inside the House chamber, which, as you point out, is just at the end of that hallway where you're seeing these people walk. Our producer in the chamber now locked down as one of the main sets of doors has been barricaded. Most of the members were evacuated from the floor after being handed gas masks, basically. That, of course, in the event that police were to deploy tear gas or something like that, they would need gas masks to protect themselves. They were not handed these masks because we have seen any evidence of anything like that already happening, but rather as a precaution. But it's been a very chaotic scene on the House floor. Members very concerned, one praying over others. There are a number of members of the House who are still in the chamber with some of the reporters that are there. Again, we talked earlier about those galleries that are up on the third floor. The House floor itself is on the second floor. There's not usually members in those galleries, but they were there because of the coronavirus precautions. It was a way to spread people out, to follow social distancing guidelines and restrictions. So some of those members still in the chamber. But again, Lester, underscoring here that now we have both, as Pete Williams reported, the Senate, floor of the Senate has been evacuated. The House, the floor of the House has been evacuated. If you can hear something going on behind me, it's the emergency alert that Muriel Bowser has issued for the curfew here. It's now setting off all of our phones, and you can hear audible alarms here, but it's related to that. It's not something separate that's going on here at the Capitol, although it does sound like we may be about to get an overhead announcement here. So we're going to keep an ear on that, and we'll let you know if we have any further updates from here, Lester.
Yeah, please feel free to flag me if you've got something there. Casey, thanks very much. We were looking for a moment ago the other side of the Capitol. Actually, are you hearing that announcement with Casey? No, can't hear it. There was some kind of announcement in the Capitol. Are you?
Right now we've just got a siren, but I will make sure that we are recording here, and we'll let you know if they say anything audible that we're able to hear about what we should do here. Again, Lester, we are in the Russell Senate office building, which is across the street from the Capitol building where most of this drama is playing out. And we are locked down here. There are tunnels underground, as Pete referenced. Yes, Lester.
All right, Casey, thank you. I want to bring in NBC News national security analyst Frank Filguzzi. Frank, I've got a lot of questions, but I just want to know your thoughts as all this unfolds and what we are witnessing right now.
Lester, so as a security professional, I know there'll be time after this incident is cleared and resolved to go through and understand where failures and compromises occurred and where planning may have been inadequate. But right now, just a couple of thoughts as it's still playing out. First, if you're part of this group or you think you want to join the group that is breaching security, I want you to know something. I want you to know that you are committing a federal violation. You are going to become a federal criminal. Your acts are going to be investigated by the FBI and the U.S. Capitol Police. This is serious business. Threats and assaults on members of the Senate and House, even greater in terms of federal consequences. So you need to think through your actions if you're headed into the district or you're part of this group that's doing this. Secondly, we're watching the tension play out between a democratic republic that allows and wants its people to have access to its legislative body, and the need for incredible security during one of the most volatile periods in recent history. And today we saw that tension bleed into each other, the need to have the public access and watch its government while, and exercise civil liberties and protest rights, while others are instigating a breach of compromise that actually undermines the very democracy that allows you to do the protest in the first place. Lastly, Lester, we have a president for the past 4 years who's claimed to be the law and order president, but let's be clear here. He has made the job of law enforcement today and in the past all the more harder. They are facing an incredible challenge right now, and he's just tweeted that we need to understand that law enforcement is on the right side. I don't know what that means, but I know this. It's not helpful to law enforcement when you're threatening them, when you're breaching security of our nation's capital, and when you're preventing democracy from actually happening.
As you said, there will be time for after-action reviews, but watching this play out on live television, there seemed to be a rather small number of police officers outside that east front, and that there was some signal to retreat, and that's when folks were able to breach inside. I know we don't know a lot about. Are you surprised there wasn't a more robust security force visible at the outset of this, knowing the passions that all this has brought?
Yeah, Lester, those who monitor the sites of the extreme and even violent militia groups and groups like Proud Boys and QAnon, we've seen this playing out in the past couple of weeks. We've seen the chatter. We've seen the talk of how to overwhelm the Capitol Police, how to breach the Capitol. And I know that certainly the federal agencies monitor many of those same chat sites and extremist groups. So this is not a surprise. I don't quite understand how we got to this point today, and we're going to need some answers about Capitol Police deployment of National Guard and why it appears that insufficient resources were available.
All right, Frank, as he said, there'll be lots of questions, lots of answers later, but right now, the here and now is you've got people who have gathered on both sides of the Capitol. They have essentially stormed the steps there. Some have made their way inside. Police have now set up, at least at some parts of the Capitol, you don't see it in this picture certainly, but they have set up kind of human chains there in front. Here you've got, they've essentially created a buffer zone in the west front. By the way, this is the area where Joe Biden will take the oath of office in just a few weeks on that west front. That's typically where the seating is for the inauguration, the swearing of a new president. So the crowd there has been, it's a little bit of a higher climb to enter from that side. And thus you see most of the crowd here on the east side now, the east front, as it's known, of the Capitol. We've been talking off and on with Frank Thorpe. He's an NBC News producer who, like everyone in the Capitol right now, is in lockdown. Frank, it has to be an eerie feeling. You're watching these pictures and you're inside the building, but you really can't see what's happening. What are you hearing?
Yeah, it's a confusing situation, Lester, because to be honest, a lot of the members of the who just don't feel comfortable, who want to get out of the Capitol, have no idea if they can leave, and we have no idea where the protesters are inside the building. I can tell you, going back to the video that we saw earlier of the protesters walking towards the House chamber, it's just I can't stress to you how just unprecedented this situation is in terms of having this many people inside the Capitol that have not been screened. I mean, as you noted, a lot of these protesters are peaceful, but just having people within the Capitol who haven't gone through the screening process to get into this building that's concerning to not only the lawmakers, but the aides that are here that are locked down in their offices, the press that are locked down in their offices as well. We have another producer, Haley Talbot, who is currently in the process of trying to get out of the House chamber. She was there to cover the House proceedings during the debate, and she's been taken out of the House chamber, but she's trying to figure out how they can actually get out of the building. She's just with members of Congress who said that they're calling their families to say that they're okay. I mean, I can tell you that, most of the members of the press here are doing the same, just to give them an update, but it's a tense feeling.
Yeah, Frank Thorpe, thank you for that update. Finishing the thought, a tense situation to be sure, as we, at least in this video, we see folks walking back and forth in plain view of police officers. We don't know what their orders are or what the plan is, but no one in this crowd seems to be aggressive, but simply walking, exercising free reign of the Capitol, an area that, as Frank had pointed out, has been closed off to the general public for months and months because of COVID protocols and restrictions. But now inside and very close to that House chamber, where a number of people remain right now, very concerned about what is going to happen here, how they plan to clear the Capitol. Will it involve any chemical agents? Are there enough gas masks? So these are questions I don't think any of us woke up thinking we'd be asking as this process began, this joint session of Congress to entertain the objections, kind of the last gasp of Republicans trying to throw a monkey wrench into the results of the election. The conclusion, a foregone one, but nonetheless a demonstration by some members of both the Senate and House and a determination to challenge some of the battleground state victories for Joe Biden. But here is where we are at right now, a scene, as I noted, not unlike ones we've seen over the years over disputed elections in faraway places in the globe. But this is America. This is the U.S. Capitol right now. There is the American flag, and beneath it, these crowds of people now who have stormed, trying to make their wishes known. This is a day in which the president spoke, even as his own vice president announced that he could essentially no longer support this idea of trying to turn the election upside down. The Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, in very impassioned remarks at the beginning of debate, saying that those who support these objections are an embarrassment to themselves and an embarrassment to their country. So he also breaking ranks with the president, but Donald Trump continuing to press forward his claim that he's due a second term. And you can see police have, this is again the west, we just switched, but that other shot you were looking at was the west front, where police have been able to establish some kind of a barrier and stopping the crowds. They appear to have detained someone there. But by and large, they have held their ground there, and you can see they put up a pretty serious line of blue on those. I believe those are the bleachers that have been put in place for the inauguration on the west side, where that is typically held. Let me bring in Casey. I'm sorry. Let me bring in Hallie Jackson to get some more perspective. So the president is acknowledging what is happening here, but doesn't seem to be taking great steps to tell people to go home.
He's done a tweet. I mean, he's done a single tweet here, Lester. And even for some people who used to work for him, you are seeing a groundswell of some, at least, saying, you need to do more, Mr. President, basically. He is probably the only person, and it's even arguable at that, who could potentially get that message through to the people who are now, as you put it succinctly, Lester, earlier in the show, putting the United States Capitol under siege. That is what we are seeing at this moment. You have to remember, Lester, this is a building, and I'm looking at this, I've done countless, live shots, shows from the building in and out. It just doesn't look like this, right? There's security around the building, but more importantly, Lester, or equally importantly, there's also private homes. There's daycares. There are other, facilities unconnected to the functioning of government, right, that are in the vicinity of the Hill where we're talking about here. And this is affecting many more people than just the people you're seeing on the screens, than just the duly elected officials of this country. Key, first and foremost, first priority, safety. There's also a question secondarily, as you are looking at that shot, it appeared somebody being pulled out on a stretcher. Secondarily is what happens now. We understand, as we've been reporting here, this lockdown is happening at the Capitol. What does this mean for the process that, 2 hours ago, Lester, we started talking about the Electoral College vote count? I can tell you that I've been texting with sources and one Republican official suggesting that perhaps this will, maybe they hope, give some senators pause in continuing the objections in the vote count. We don't know that that's actually going to be the case. We don't know how this is going to impact the actual procedures. I think the biggest priority for folks right now is making sure that the people inside the building are safe. You have to wonder, Lester, I ask this question, where is the president? We know physically where President Trump is. We understand, based on the reporting from people in the pool at the White House, he was in the Oval Office at least for a portion of the afternoon here as these protests, now frankly, mob stormed the steps of the Capitol. Is he going to speak on television? Is he going to give an address and give remarks? We don't have any guidance on that. We have no reason to suspect he might, other than that is perhaps the expectation of the country's leader at a moment like this just surreal and extraordinary moment, and one that's going to go down in American history, Lester. So, again, first priority, safety. Secondarily, how do you get past this moment? I know that you got to imagine these officers, and we're seeing it coming in from all parts. This is what I'm talking about, Lester. You're looking at the Capitol complex, and then that's Constitution, right? So that is on the House side. The House office buildings are in that. I think this is our chopper shot from our local affiliate, if I am guessing correctly. You can see those House office buildings on the other side of the street. The underground passages that you're talking about connect those different facilities. The street obviously shut down, police in place. The other piece of this is the law enforcement presence. This rally had been what was originally a rally, which has turned into something very different, had been planned. It was a known event. It was known that people who were supporting President Trump were traveling in from all over the country to be on the National Mall at the Ellipse, where the president, by the way, spoke, right? Didn't just watch. He actually actively went and spoke and engaged with those protesters. And now hear what we're seeing at the Capitol, Lester.
All right, Hallie, thank you. On the phone with us right now is Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger from Illinois. Congressman, thank you for joining us. First of all, are you and your colleagues safe right now?
Yeah, everybody's safe. I don't want to give my location, but I'll tell you this is madness, and anybody that calls themselves a Republican like myself should be very ashamed right now. And I don't know if this has ever happened in history. It's disgusting, and this is not how democracies and how politics works.
I don't think a lot of folks would disagree with you on that. Can you tell us, you were in the middle of debate, was there simply an adjournment and you were taken to a special place? I mean, how did it all play out from your point of view?
Yeah, in my case, I kind of started seeing things unfurl, so I came back to a different location, and but I have been talking to people that are on the floor, and obviously when the Capitol was breached, they did security protocol, which they're good at, but significantly outnumbered. Throwing on escape hoods. I mean, we have these emergency escape hoods that we think it's one of those doomsday scenarios that we'll never use. We're using those. And right now, I think it's a matter of hoping that cooler heads prevail, hoping that the president actually quits being a coward and calls in the D.C. Guard and actually takes some leadership for a moment. But, until then, we're going to continue to do what we need to do to be safe.
Are you, what we're watching right now, do you lay that at the president's feet?
Do I think, wait, say that again, I couldn't understand that.
Yeah. What we're watching right now with the siege of the Capitol, do you lay this at the president's feet? Is he responsible?
Yeah. I mean, look, absolutely. Not just in his speech today where he basically implied this was going to happen. We've seen this all over Twitter. I don't look at Parler, but I hear it's been all over Parler. This is not a surprise to anybody and shouldn't be. And I've said for weeks that I fear violence on January 6th. And for the president to go out today when everybody's in a heightened emotional state after being falsely promised that somehow Congress can magically pick the next president, he completely shirked his responsibility as president to keep the American people safe.
A number of your colleagues in the House and certainly a number from the Senate have announced, and they've already demonstrated that they are going to try to reject some of these electoral votes. Do you think that this will stop the process, or do you think that they will want to carry on once order is restored there?
Well, because the Constitution, is enduring, the process will go forward. If any of my friends or colleagues continue with the objection, I think that is a disgrace. I think the reality is, first off, it was a fool's errand anyway. It was a grift, an attempt to raise money. And now, after this, if we, assuage these actions, we can only expect more in the future.
What was it like? I don't know if you actually heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's remarks today, but he essentially broke ranks with the president and said it's over, it's done in so many words. What was it like to hear that?
Well, it was good. I wish he'd have said it a while ago. But the bottom line is we have too many people out here that want to avoid temporary pain by telling people what they don't want to hear. So they go along with this magical idea that Congress gets to pick the president. Congress doesn't. And what we're seeing now is, the result of false hope given to people. And so it was great to see the majority leader say that. I hope all the leadership in the House and Senate say the exact same thing. And I hope when we reconvene finally that we move forward and just accept the results as the American people voted for, whether we like those results or not.
I think it's fair to say that much of your party will bear some of the stain of this day going forward. There is also the vote in Georgia that we're watching very closely, that when all is said and done, we could be looking at a Democratic-held Senate. How serious is the damage to the Republican Party going forward?
I think it's serious. I think, did we make gains within minority communities? Sure, but we're losing in one very terminal demographic, and that is young people. As young people grow older, they're rejecting Republican politics. We've gotten away from the Reagan-esque idea of explaining the compassion of conservatism, and we've relegated to a culture war. That's not the Republican Party that me at 42 years old was in love with. I love the idea of a strong American leadership and leadership around the globe. We have to get back to that, but we're going to bear the consequences of this for a little bit.
Before I let you go, have you or any of your colleagues, is there any effort right now to try and get in touch with the White House and say, please make this stop?
I don't know. I think right now it's kind of the, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're at the bottom of that and just getting through this moment. But I certainly hope people with rank in the House are doing that and in the Senate. And we go beyond some, tweet saying thank you to the Capitol Police. And we actually start calling for real action to restore order to the people's house. Otherwise, we're no different than any of, these failed democracies around the world.
All right. Well, Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Republican from Illinois, we thank you for being with us, and we're grateful that you and your colleagues are okay right now. Please stay safe, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we continue to watch this crowd outside the Capitol. It began as a day of peaceful protest, and largely what we've seen, at least in the view of the camera, has been peaceful. Nonetheless, this crowd has breached beyond where they were supposed to be. Many have breached actually inside the Capitol itself. So this is an ongoing situation. We don't know what's happening on the law enforcement level inside to contain those who went in unscreened, and based on the pictures we've seen, have had largely free reign of very critical parts of the Capitol. But that is how it is playing out right now. Ellison Barber is on the east front of the Capitol, on the edge of this crowd, watching it all play out. How would you characterize things right now, Ellison?
Hey, Lester, we're starting to see people come down from the steps who are claiming at least to have been inside. Two people came by and walked by us, and they said, we made it inside. I asked them if they wanted to talk, and they said I probably shouldn't, and kept going. There was another guy in militia-like tan garb who walked by us, and I think he didn't see my microphone initially, and he said, we made it to Nancy's office. When I asked him to stop and talk to us, he also declined on that. But there's kind of been, if those people were in fact inside, a celebratory mood here for them as they make their way out. You can see up on the steps here where people are still gathered. Off to the left side of the steps, Capitol Police have kind of congregated in a group there, and they've been there for the last little bit, kind of just standing by to the side of these protesters. We have seen a couple snipers, or what appear to be snipers, on the roof of the U.S. Capitol. Other than that, though, the situation on this side has remained somewhat calm. It's not really the right word for this, but as you said, we have not seen any acts of violence per se right in front of us, but we have seen a forceful crowd as they made their way up to the front and initially passed through those bicycle barricades. They are still here, and as some people come out and claim to have been inside the U.S. Capitol, those people are then being greeted amongst this crowd as heroes of sorts, being cheered for going inside. One person who had come out, they had some sort of liquid water type thing on them. They said that they had been sprayed. But again, none of those people were willing to speak with us on camera. You can hear the crowd right now cheering some. as they have flags, many of them Trump flags, a Don't Tread on Me flag held on both sides now have been put on have been hoisted up kind of on the sides there. So this crowd has stayed here where they are, Capitol Police on the side, not seeming to necessarily engage with the crowd here. But as I said, we haven't seen any sort of violent acts from the crowd here, but people who are claiming to have been inside are being celebrated as they make their way out. Lester?
Yeah, Allison, stand by a second. I just want to share from our investigative producer, Tom Witter, a spokesperson for the Washington, D.C. Fire and EMS, says they have several people have been treated for injuries, and there's an unconfirmed report. We'll wait to confirm it of a more even more serious nature that we'll try to firm up. But Allison, as we watch this crowd, many of these people had gone to a protest, an organized, permitted protest today, and have followed the crowd here. Have you seen any children in the crowd?
Yeah, quite a few, actually. I don't know if we can walk a little and show you some of the people who are here. At various points throughout the day, we have seen families. We have seen people here with their dogs, with their pets. We were here all morning. We've been here since about 8 a.m. There's a dog right over there. There you have it. This was a peaceful protest. People were here. They were vocal. They wanted their voices heard, but things were relatively calm. And in a split second, you saw the crowd rush the front towards the barricades and make their way up here. And it felt like the entire mood, the whole day, it changed. We have not seen any overt acts of violence, but as soon as, this is where the initial breach was, right over here, as soon as that initial breach happened, we did see, once we made our way up to the front, and we saw somebody being put on a stretcher and taken out of here. I'm not sure if she fell, she was pushed over or what, but there was a lot of blood left on the ground where someone had clearly been hurt in the process, maybe inadvertently, but in the process of these barricades being breached and making their way up here. But not as many children here right now, and some people I think have stayed a little bit further back. But yeah, I mean, this was a largely peaceful protest. A lot of people had come throughout the day. At one point, a group of people dressed in militia-like garb, who I believe were Proud Boys. They're not wearing their normal attire that they wear, but they were saying a term that Proud Boy tends to say and chant as they walk around. They had been kind of walking around the perimeter at one point of the U.S. Capitol and chanting. But other than that, things were calm. And then in that split second, you saw the crowd rush. You saw people break through these bicycle barricades and make their way up to the Capitol, and everything changed. But yeah, a lot of families have been here throughout the day, though some seem to have dispersed and left at this point. Lester?
All right, Allison, thank you very much. As we watch this extraordinary situation play out, it's hard not to look at this and not feel that there are at least, and not to be hyperbolic, but to feel that there's some elements of a coup attempt in what we're watching right now. I want to go to Frank Thorpe. We've been hearing from him by telephone. He's in his office there, our NBC producer office there in the Capitol under lockdown. I understand you have some video, Frank.
Yeah, so Lester, this is some stunning video, I have to say. I don't think I've ever expected to see anything like this in my entire career covering Congress. The idea of people who have broken into the Capitol and taken over the Senate floor. This is about a dozen folks who came from outside, and they're just mulling around looking through desks. There's a guy sitting there in the gallery above. He asked, "Who are you with? Who are you with?" And that was about time for me to go. Walking through the hallways, I have to say it's a weird scene in that there was, some protesters that were walking through the hallways, and Capitol Police were kind of following them, but they weren't necessarily arresting them. It's really unclear as to how they're really dealing with the protesters. I haven't seen any arrests, but I've also been locked in in our offices. So we're just sheltered in place at the moment right now. But I have to say that this scene that you're seeing right now on television is absolutely stunning. The idea that these people have come from outside and broken into the Capitol and decided to take the Senate floor like this, where just about an hour and a half or 2 hours ago, they were debating an objection to the Electoral College. It's just a stunning scene.
Who you with?
Stunning doesn't even begin to describe it, Frank. If this picture makes you sick, I think you're probably not alone. This is inside the chambers of the American Congress, people freely walking among the tables and the desks. is just beyond unbelievable.
I mean, Lester,
I want to go to Ken.
Just to kind of nail down this point, though, I mean, they still need to finish this count. They still need to be able to return here and do their work. And there's no way that this will require sweeps. I mean, once they actually clear the building, they'll have to sweep the chamber. I mean, the two chambers of the House and the Senate are basically known within the Capitol as two of the safest places in the entire Capitol Hill complex. I mean, and they're protected by Capitol Police. There are details for leadership members. I mean, this is just a completely outside of the realm of possibility situation in which that it's going to take an enormous amount of time just to clear out and to do a security sweep of the desks, of the hallways, of the rooms before they would be able to even start to count again.
All right, Frank, continue to stay safe inside there. On the phone with us is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania. Congressman, first of all, are you in a safe location and okay with your colleagues? Congressman Boyle, do you hear me okay? Okay, we've lost him. We'll try to get him back and get a perspective of what's happening inside with members of Congress. I want to go to Kelly O'Donnell. Kelly was at that rally that where this is an offshoot of that rally. You heard the president speak today. Give us a sense of the tone and things we heard that might have suggested it would end up what we're looking at.
Well, spending hours today with some of the Trump supporters who are now protesters, the president repeatedly urged them to fight. And he meant that metaphorically, but he also may have meant that in this kind of show and demonstration. He repeatedly said, we will walk down Pennsylvania Avenue to the U.S. Capitol. And I began that march walking along with a number of those in attendance. And I could hear people around me, Lester, saying, the president said he's walking with us. I knew that the president had returned to the White House, but his supporters believed he was walking with them. One man who was just next to me said, but he said he's walking, so I'm sure he's walking. It's just an anecdote that gives you an idea of how the president has this kind of powerful connection with his supporters. He has just tweeted again in the last few minutes, and he says, I am asking everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we in uppercase are the party of law and order. Respect the law and order of our great men and women in blue. Thank you. But this is the same president who repeatedly told them to fight, repeatedly told his supporters that he was robbed of this election, and they were too, that their votes were discounted, manipulated, thrown out by various states, things that have not been supported by the facts, and in many ways incited this kind of fervor. The president always measures how he is being perceived by his crowd size, and there was an enormous crowd today. And as you could see this play out, as Ellison pointed out, certainly there were families there. There were several people with dogs. I'm one of those dog people who always talks to the people who are walking their dogs with these kinds of events. And there were the flags, and there were all of the things that in a typical Trump rally environment before the election were much more upbeat. These folks were determined to walk to the Capitol and to make their message known. Many of them probably did not know it was going to turn into this. But clearly some people planned this kind of breach of the Capitol, and in many ways the kind of images that Frank, our colleague, was just showing us, a disrespect of these institutions that they are angry about. There was so much talk today among Trump supporters and those speaking at the rally prior to the president about anger toward even Republicans, believing that there were Republicans who were not standing up for President Trump. And of course, we heard the president repeatedly urge Mike Pence, his vice president, who has been unfailingly loyal for 4 years, to do what the president wanted today. Mike Pence did not do that in a lengthy statement where he explained what he believes to be the limits constitutionally of his role. And now we have this with an uncertain way of how this gets resolved. Today is the day the counts are supposed to be completed. That has been disrupted. As Frank and other colleagues have described, the scene at the Capitol remains tense, volatile, and unknown. I've been in touch with various elected officials that I know from my time covering the Capitol. all have said they are safe, but in a new world that few could have imagined. It was predicted, and yet still so hard to imagine as we watch this unfold. Lester?
All right, hey, Kelly, thanks very much for that. As we watch these live pictures, this is the east front of the Capitol, and that crowd continuing to occupy the steps and surrounding the entrance there. On the phone with us, we're going to try again, Democratic Congressman, Democratic Congresswoman from Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. Congresswoman, can you tell us, are you safe and in an okay place right now?
Yes, thank you so much, Lester. I am. I'm in a holding room with a lot of other members of Congress after we were evacuated out of the floor in the gallery area.
Can you tell us how things played out when you became aware of that the Capitol had been breached and how you were let out?
So we initially got alert on our phone. The Capitol Police were just extraordinary in keeping us updated. We all got out our gas masks, which are under the seats on the floor and in the gallery, because we know that there was some chemical irritants that were deployed in various parts of the Capitol. And so we made a couple efforts at trying to evacuate, but at one point that became difficult because there were people banging on the doors of the floor of the House of Representatives. And so at that point in time, there was an effort to, of course, lock all the doors and barricade the doors. And it took multiple efforts for us to be able to make our way safely and then depart the Capitol and gallery areas where we were gathered to participate in what is our constitutional duty of counting electors. It's a straightforward process that is supposed to be procedural, but one that we were intending to carry out today until it was interrupted.
Did you come face to face with any of the protesters?
I did not. Where we were on our way out, there were protesters who were laid out in the prone position. Capitol Police had clearly taken control of the situation, and as they were leading us and members of the press out, that was at that point as close as we got, kind of person to person.
Were you and your colleagues wearing gas masks as you were leaving?
Some people were, so we all had them. We had them opened. We had them deployed. There was some people were saying that we needed to put them on. Some didn't have them on, but everybody was ready because, again, in the end, the way we actually evacuated out of the gallery, we did not go in the direction where there was the chemical irritant. And so I had mine on for a bit, but mostly had it off and didn't come in contact with any of the irritant.
All right, well, we're glad you're okay. So let's talk now about what we are seeing, what is happening outside the Capitol. Give me your thoughts, how we got here, and where do we go forward?
I'm a former intelligence officer, and my whole background is understanding the challenges that foreign governments are facing. The scene that we saw on Capitol Hill, the banging, the yelling, the screaming, the demands to enter the chamber, the United States Congress, those are the sorts of things that happen in third world nations, the sorts of places where our diplomats and intelligence officers write home to the United States and say, this is a dangerous scenario, this is an endangered democracy. It's deeply, deeply disturbing what we saw at the U.S. Capitol today. And but my appreciation to the Capitol Police for doing everything they possibly could to keep us, our staff, our teams, the cafeteria workers, sanitation workers, and employees of the Capitol and members of the press safe as they worked to systematically ensure that active threats were subdued and that we could get to a safe place.
All right, Representative Abigail Spanberger from Virginia, thank you for taking some time to speak with us. We're glad you and your colleagues are okay.
Thank you so much. And again, thanks to the Capitol Police and Metro Police who's been responding to help as well. Thank you so much, Lester.
Yep. All right. Yes, and we see the Capitol Police there have taken up a position on the west side of the Capitol. There in the yellow jackets up there, the high visibility yellow, keeping the line of protesters from entering at least that side. But clearly a situation that is beyond anything most people could imagine taking place right now. I do want to go to Pete Williams, if Pete is standing by, because it was brought up a moment ago. What we saw today, the beginning of this joint session of Congress, whether there's objections or not, Pete, there's something magic to this date. It has to happen today, correct?
It has to start today. That's certainly right. That's set by statute. That's the Electoral Count Act. That's this law that was passed 133 years ago that guides the process. Now, it doesn't say it has to end today, but it has to start today. So it's met that constitutional requirement. And of course, at some point when this is all resolved, it's going to resume. And it doesn't really matter how long it takes. I mean, they've got until the 20th, obviously, which is Inauguration Day. A couple of thoughts, Lester. Number one, this scene is obviously going to cause some serious rethinking about how the inauguration itself will be planned. Now, we knew it was already scaled back because of the pandemic, no parade, for example, but you just know, and I just got off the phone with one law enforcement person, they're looking at these scenes and thinking, well, what changes do they need to make in the plan for the inaugural? Now, I will say that an inauguration is a much bigger event that involves many more law enforcement organizations. There's much tighter security, but still, there's got to be some rethinking. One other thing, Lester, we've been told now by two separate law enforcement organizations. You saw a picture earlier of a person being wheeled out of the Capitol, or at least being wheeled outside the Capitol on a gurney with apparent injuries. And we're told now by two separate law enforcement agencies that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol a short time ago by a member of law enforcement. Now, we don't know what law enforcement person this was, or whether it was someone from the Capitol Police, from Metro Police. I mean, there are a number of different police agencies that are responsible for security in that area, and when there is something like this, there's an all-hands-on-deck kind of response from a number of different police agencies that can respond to help, police and federal agencies. So we don't know which organization was involved, but and we don't know what the condition is of the person who was shot, and we don't know the circumstances of it. All I can report is that law enforcement officials tell us that one person was shot inside the U.S. Capitol by a member of law enforcement.
All right, Pete Williams, thank you for adding that. It's extraordinary that we have not, there's right now, it seems to be no effort, at least from the outside, to remove anyone. But at the same time, no one here is advancing. The picture has remained rather constant here on both sides of the Capitol. People crowded in, waving flags, essentially moving their rally to the doorsteps of the Capitol as members of Congress have been ushered to safe places. We heard a description a moment ago of reaching for gas masks that had positioned at their desks, and some of them actually donning them as they made their way to safer areas, still hearing the beating of people trying to get in the door. So an extraordinary scene continuing to unfold there. Let me bring in, if I can right now, Hallie Jackson again. Hallie, you've been watching all this play out. Is this a fear that you had heard expressed, from those associated with the White House, that something like this could happen?
Here's the thing, Lester, for people who have tracked movements in many ways among people, sort of the fringe elements of what you could call the president's base, there had been discussion of this day specifically for a while now, right? Which is raising the question, as Pete's talked about, and as others, of the law enforcement presence. That is obviously something that, as you showed on that shot, you could see some of the presence here at the Capitol, but this just incredibly upsetting, I think it's fair to say, scene at the Capitol. I will say that you are now seeing more and more, Lester, people who are close to the president, and I'm going to try to pull this up. Mick Mulvaney, I believe, is among them, calling on the president to say something. His allies, his aides, getting out there on Twitter, sure, saying, hey, stop. This is not okay. This is not appropriate. This is not who we are. The president's former campaign manager, for example, doing the same. But now there are some who are pushing the president publicly, Lester, to try to come out and do something more forcefully. This is a president who, as our colleague Kelly O'Donnell noted, ended his speech at the rally, what was then a rally several hours ago, earlier this morning, by telling people we're going to walk up to the Capitol, basically. Amping them up, to use that kind of language, to come up to the Capitol. And what was, and I was on Capitol Hill, Lester, not 3-4 hours ago, and I'm telling you, I saw from our own eyes, didn't look like this, obviously. It was a mostly peaceful protest. It has turned into something very different, much uglier now. You will see, moving forward, discussion about what the president has been doing, where he has been for these last 2 hours, for these last 2.5 hours, and the moment of leadership. There will be critics who will suggest that the president has not met some of those moments in the past, but now you're seeing even some of his allies talk about this. For example, Kevin McCarthy, of course, the minority leader over on the House side, sounding rather shaken. He was over on another network calling this un-American, suggesting that, yes, he would perhaps have people reach out to the president and see if he would do more. Now, the president has tweeted 2 tweets in the couple of hours that we've been watching this, but the leadership factor on this is going to be critical. The other point that I want to make, Lester, I live in Washington. That's obviously where I'm reporting to you from now. It's 3:30 in the afternoon. It will get dark in a matter of 90 minutes or so, and you still have thousands of people out on the west front, the east front of the Capitol. They've got to clear these folks before this situation potentially gets even more disturbing. I can tell you that I know people who are having their kids, who don't have anything to do with Capitol Hill, who are having their kids affected because of the lockdowns that have been in place now, their families. This is a ripple effect. It's why you've seen the mayor of Washington institute that 6 o'clock curfew. And at that point, that could be a potential tension point, Lester, if in fact these people who are storming the Capitol are still out there.
Hallie, thank you. I want to bring in Andrea Mitchell right now. Andrea, you have seen and covered it all. Give me your thoughts about what's happening here, and also I'm curious whether this might derail the objections that were planned for this long process of counting these electoral votes today.
Well, I certainly think on the Senate side, I would find it very difficult for Senator Cruz and Senators Hawley and the others to now have to face not only Mitch McConnell, but the rest of their colleagues who have had this horrible, really violent protest because they broke into the Capitol of the United States of America. They hijacked our democracy while the Electoral College vote count. The vote was being counted. It was already certified, but it was being counted. And the process is going to pick up. They'll figure this out. I was talking earlier, interviewing Terry Gaynor, the former head of the Capitol Police, former sergeant at arms, and he said they will, bit by bit, they will move enough people in. They have, more than 1,000 Capitol Police. Clearly, they did not prevent the Capitol building from being breached on the second floor level, as you saw on the east front. That was where they got in, apparently, to both the Senate and the House floor and to the same level as Statuary Hall. So what you saw with these protesters in the chambers, in the Senate chamber, in the House chamber, thankfully, the Capitol Police had removed Vice President Pence, certainly Senator Pro Tem Chuck Grassley, who's also in the succession chain. Also the Speaker of the House, we understand, all of them, all the senators are now in safe places. You have members of the House and others who were off the floor because of COVID, not part of the joint session, who were planning their speeches. We talked to Alyssa Slotkin from Michigan, who was planning her speech. She's a former Pentagon and CIA official who has served in Iraq. At the same time, saying she's never even contemplated anything like this. And what she said was, you expect attacks in places like Iraq in wartime. You don't expect it in the Capitol building of the United States. The only time I've ever seen the Capitol evacuated was after 9/11, when we thought that plane was coming, the plane that ended up, heading towards Pennsylvania. we thought that plane, I believe it was that plane, was coming to the Capitol building. And that's when they were evacuated through a tunnel and safely further up Independence Avenue. So I've never seen anything like this, and I have to say, it is shocking, and it was started really by the President of the United States inciting that crowd. And that is as shocking as the failure of the police to prevent the Capitol building from being breached.
Andrea Mitchell, thank you for your insight there. I want to bring in my colleague, Savannah Guthrie, right now as we continue our expanded coverage. We're a little past 3:30 here in the East, and this siege, if you will, continues to go on. Welcome, Savannah.
Welcome to a scene we never thought we would witness, Lester. What's happening in the U.S. Capitol this afternoon, I'll bring you up to date on what I've seen. The governor of Virginia has tweeted that he has answered a request for the Virginia National Guard to help out to try to regain some sense of control at the Capitol right now. As mentioned, there are reports that one woman has been shot, reportedly by law enforcement. We await more information about that. We have seen those images, disturbing images of protesters inside the Capitol, breaching the Capitol, inside the Speaker's office, inside the Senate chamber, walking about freely as though this were not the heart of our democracy, performing its moment, its most sacred moment of the peaceful transition to power. These are momentous times. I want to bring Casey Hunt into this. She's our Capitol Hill correspondent. She's been there from the beginning. First of all, Casey, just we can all save the analysis for later. Just bring us up to date on what you know and what the status is of getting this situation under control.
Been the hardest piece of this to pin down, what they're going to do next to try and get this under control. As you mentioned, those requests from the National Guard to try and help deal with this situation, but whether they are en route is unclear. Remember, the District of Columbia falls into a little bit of a strange spot because it's not a state. So questions about what the Defense Department may do in that instance, we are waiting to find out and are in touch with the Speaker's office. But it has been an incredibly difficult day here on Capitol Hill. It started, of course, with the initial proceedings to begin the process to ratify President-elect Joe Biden as President of the United States. That all unfolded, it seemed, as it should have at the beginning. But of course, these protesters approached the building, ultimately breached the Capitol, and then breached the House and Senate floors, which is not something I don't think anyone who was walking into this building today anticipated. And certainly those of us who have been working up here every day for many, many years now have never seen anything like this before. So you are seeing increasingly Republicans coming out and calling on President Trump to urge the people who are here to stand down. Kevin McCarthy, the House leader, was recently interviewed on Fox News. He called it un-American. He said it needs to stop. He said that he didn't even want to talk about some of the things that he had seen in the chamber. He referenced shots fired, and I know our Pete Williams reported that. Our producer Haley Talbot was in the House of Representatives in the gallery watching the floor as events unfolded there, as the Capitol Police barricaded one of the doors as they evacuated members of the House of Representatives. Some of those members donning gas masks that are situated under the chairs in that chamber because there were chemical irritants that were discharged in the attempts to try and clear these protests. So at this point, we do know members of congressional leadership are safe. Members of the House and Senate are being taken to undisclosed locations, most of them already in those undisclosed locations if they weren't part of those initial groups. I've texted with several members of the Senate who have said that they are safe, that they feel safe at this point.